My name is Chloe, 33 years old, and I was rushing to work, so I grabbed my husband's phone by mistake. As soon as I boarded the train, my sister-in-law called, and the very first thing she talked about was draining my credit and moving his mistress into my house. True story, until that freezing Tuesday morning in Chicago, I played the role of a quiet, underpaid bookkeeping clerk perfectly. My husband Julian and his family treated me like a convenient accessory, someone to manage their tedious errands while they built a tech empire. They had absolutely no idea that I am actually a certified forensic accountant who tracks corporate fraud for a living. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart people who thought you were completely powerless. The morning started in absolute chaos. The Chicago winter wind was brutal, and in my rush to catch the Blue Line train to downtown, I snatched the black smartphone off the kitchen island. It looked exactly like mine. It was not until I found a seat on the crowded train and the screen lit up with an incoming call that I realized my mistake. The caller ID flashed Maya, my husband Julian's sister Maya, and her husband Marcus, a highly aggressive African-American finance director who served as the chief financial officer at Julian's startup, had never hidden their disdain for me. They viewed my modest lifestyle as a stain on their affluent status, conscious social circle. I intended to simply decline the call, but my thumb slipped on the screen. Before I could say a word, Maya's sharp voice pierced through the speaker. "Did you get that plain Jane loser to sign the home equity papers yet? Marcus says if we do not drain her flawless credit to secure the bridge loan before the initial public offering next month, your startup is completely dead in the water. Just get her signature tonight so you can finalize the divorce and move Victoria into the house. Do not let her smell the money, Julian." The train rattled over the tracks, the metallic screech drowning out the sudden ringing. I did not gasp. I did not cry. Years of investigating high stakes, financial embezzlement had trained me to detach emotion from data. I ended the call without making a sound. Maya thought she was talking to her brother, casually plotting my financial ruin and casually dropping the name of my husband's mistress. Victoria was Maya's best friend. I stared at Julian's locked home screen. He was a narcissistic tech chief executive who constantly mocked my career, telling everyone I was just a basic clerk who punched numbers on a calculator. He thought I was intellectually beneath him. That arrogance extended to his cybersecurity. I tapped the screen and entered my own birthday. The phone unlocked instantly. For a man building a multi-million-dollar software company, his absolute lack of basic security protocols was almost laughable. My fingers moved. I bypassed his personal email application and went straight for his secure cloud storage. While Julian spent the last 5 years treating me like a glorified maid, leaving me to wash dishes after his lavish dinner parties, I had been dismantling complex shell companies for the federal government. I knew exactly where men like Julian hid their dirty secrets. I opened my own secure remote server application on my work tablet and linked it to his device, initiating a mass data transfer. The files began populating on my screen, telling a story of profound betrayal. I found the text threads first, hundreds of messages between Julian and Victoria, detailing luxury hotel stays, expensive jewelry purchases, and their future plans for my home. He had been buying her diamond necklaces while scrutinizing my grocery receipts, claiming his startup required us to live on a tight budget. But the financial documents were far more devastating. I navigated to a folder labeled Project Apex inside. I uncovered a labyrinth of forged documents. Julian and Marcus had actively falsified revenue projections to attract investors. Worse, I found the bridge loan Maya had mentioned. They had drafted a home equity line of credit against my elderly grandfather's property. They had already forged my signature on the preliminary application. They just needed my physical signature on the final notary page to release $500,000 directly into Marcus's offshore holding account. They were planning to steal my family's legacy, drain my pristine credit score file for divorce, and leave me holding $500,000 in fraudulent debt. The progress bar on my data transfer inched forward 70%, 80%. I needed every single file to build an ironclad case against them. I needed the metadata, the timestamps, and the encrypted communication logs between Marcus and Julian. I watched the numbers climb as the train plunged into the underground tunnel beneath the city. 85%. My breath fogged the cold window of the train. I kept my posture relaxed, looking like just another tired commuter heading to a boring office job. Inside my mind was mapping out a strategy to dismantle Julian's entire life. I would not just leave him, I would professionally and legally annihilate his tech startup, his fraudulent chief financial officer brother-in-law, and his arrogant sister. 90%. Suddenly, the screen on Julian's phone flashed with a high-priority alert. Device location tracked via smartwatch. My blood ran cold. Julian had woken up, realized his phone was missing, and triggered the emergency tracking feature. He knew exactly where the device was. 95%. The train slowed down, approaching the Monroe station. I clutched the phone, praying for the transfer to complete. I looked up toward the doors of the next car. The doors slid open. Julian was standing there, pushing his way through the crowd of commuters. The doors of the train car slid open at Monroe Station. Julian shoved past a woman and lunged onto the platform. His eyes locked onto me. I dropped my shoulders, allowing my posture to shrink into the familiar shape of the terrified, submissive wife he believed me to be. I stepped onto the concrete platform, clutching my worn canvas tote bag. He closed the distance between us in 3 massive strides. His hand shot out and gripped my upper arm with bruising force. He ripped his sleek black smartphone right out of my hands. "What is wrong with you?" Julian hissed, his voice echoing off the tiled walls of the station. "You are so clumsy. You grabbed my phone off the counter like a complete idiot." I widened my eyes, forcing a slight tremble into my bottom lip. "Julian, I am so sorry. I was rushing to catch the train and they look exactly the same. I did not mean to take it. You almost ruined a massive corporate merger this morning." He spat, stepping closer so he towered over me. "I have investors calling endlessly, and I have been entirely disconnected because my incompetent wife cannot tell her cheap phone from my device. You are lucky I put up with your incompetence, Chloe." I kept my head bowed exactly the way he liked it. He released my arm just long enough to violently adjust the cuffs of his custom Italian suit. The fluorescent lights caught the heavy gold face of his $30,000 Rolex. Meanwhile, I was standing in front of him wearing a threadbare polyester coat from a discount rack. He pointed a manicured finger down at my feet. "Look at you." Julian sneered, his upper lip curling in disgust. "You are wearing scuffed loafers to a downtown office. I am out here building an empire, and you cannot even manage a simple morning commute without causing a massive crisis." He did not mention that my shoes were scuffed because he funneled every spare dollar of my bookkeeping salary into his personal accounts. He controlled our finances, claiming his tech startup required massive capital. He genuinely believed I made $40,000 a year. He had no idea that the canvas tote bag I was clutching held a laptop with access to offshore corporate accounts. I played the financially dependent wife flawlessly. "I will be more careful, Julian," I whispered. "Please do not be angry." "Your little data entry job means nothing," he snapped, wiping his smartphone screen. "You sit at a desk and hit buttons all day. I am dealing with real money, real power." His anger morphed into a calculated, controlling smirk. He knew he had successfully humiliated me in public, and now he was ready to extract his penalty. "You are going to make up for this stupidity," Julian ordered. "Maya and Marcus are hosting a celebration dinner at their house tonight. You are going to be there at 6 sharp, and since you nearly sabotaged my morning, you are paying for the catering." I looked up, playing the part of a panicked, impoverished earner. "Julian, the catering for your sister's parties usually costs thousands. I do not have that kind of money available right now." "Figure it out," he demanded coldly. "Put it on a credit card. Ask your boss for an advance. I do not care how you do it, Chloe. My sister expects a premium spread. If you embarrass me in front of Marcus tonight by bringing some cheap takeout, there will be severe consequences. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Julian," I murmured. "I will handle the catering, I promise." 6 o'clock, he barked. "Do not be late and do not wear those hideous shoes." Julian turned on his heel and marched toward the opposite platform to catch the northbound train back to his office. He was entirely convinced he had just put his pathetic, useless wife back in her place. I stood perfectly still until he boarded his train and the doors closed behind him. My entire physical demeanor shifted. My shoulders pulled back. The manufactured terror vanished from my face, leaving behind a cold determination. I reached into my cheap canvas tote bag and pulled out my own phone. I walked toward a quiet corner of the station platform near a coffee kiosk shielding my screen. I bypassed my biometric security and opened the encrypted cloud application connected to my private server. The data transfer from Julian's phone had successfully completed right before he snatched the device. I navigated straight to the folder I had flagged on the train, the one labeled Project Apex. My forensic accounting instincts told me this was where the real leverage lived. I opened the most recent document located in the file. It was the home equity line of credit application Maya had referenced during her panicked phone call. I zoomed in on the intricate financial details. Julian and Marcus had structured a high-risk bridge loan to temporarily inflate the valuation of Julian's tech startup ahead of their initial public offering. They did not use their own assets as collateral. I scrolled down to the guarantor section. The property listed was a prime piece of commercial real estate in downtown Boston. It was a legacy property owned by my elderly grandfather, who had trusted me with his power of attorney when his health began to fail. I scrolled to the final signature page, $500,000. Below that was my signature. It was an incredibly precise forgery, but as an expert in financial fraud, I immediately spotted the subtle hesitations in the pen strokes. Julian and Marcus had forged my name to illegally leverage $500,000 against my vulnerable grandfather's legacy. They had weaponized my marriage to commit federal bank fraud. A cold smile spread across my face. They wanted me to buy them dinner tonight. I was going to serve them absolute financial ruin. At 6 o'clock, I pulled up to Maya and Marcus's upscale suburban mansion. I walked through the double mahogany doors and nearly collided with Beatrice, my mother-in-law. She shoved a heavy stack of dirty appetizer plates directly into my chest. "The caterers are setting up the main course," Beatrice snapped, adjusting her diamond earrings. "Go make yourself useful and wash these, Chloe. Do not just stand around taking up space while the successful people in this family actually accomplish things." I washed the plates quietly in the kitchen. In the dining room, Marcus sat at the head of the table, swirling expensive red wine, holding court, using aggressive financial jargon to intentionally intimidate everyone. When I took my seat at the far end of the table, Marcus locked eyes with me. "So, Chloe, how is the little bookkeeping job?" Marcus asked, a condescending smirk playing on his lips, still balancing petty cash drawers. "You should really pay attention tonight. We are finalizing corporate asset liquidation strategies for Julian's startup. It involves high-level acquisitions, way above your pay grade." Marcus pulled out a crisp invoice and slid it across the table. The catering bill, he announced loudly. $2,000. Consider it your rent, Chloe. Julian practically subsidizes your entire existence. The least you can do is feed the people who actually contribute to society. Maya laughed, resting her hand over Julian's arm. "Do not overwhelm her, Marcus. She probably has to calculate how many months of her salary that covers." I calmly opened my bag and retrieved a heavy matte black metal card. It was a high-tier corporate card issued exclusively to managing partners of top financial firms. I placed it directly on top of the invoice and pushed it back toward Marcus. "That should cover it," I said, keeping my voice perfectly even. "And regarding your corporate asset liquidation strategy, Marcus, you are fundamentally misapplying the term. You are describing a leveraged buyout, utilizing mezzanine financing, which is highly irregular for a startup pre-initial public offering, unless you are desperately trying to cover massive undocumented liabilities." The dining room went completely silent. Marcus stared at me, his jaw slightly slack. The smug superiority vanished from his face, replaced instantly by a flash of genuine panic. He looked down at the heavy black card and then back at me, visibly threatened. No one in this house had ever heard me use a financial term more complex than a savings account. Before Marcus could respond, Julian loudly cleared his throat, breaking the tension. He grabbed a thick stack of stapled papers from the sideboard and aggressively slapped them down onto my plate right over my dinner napkin. "Just some routine tax documents for my startup, honey," Julian said, forcing a tight, artificial smile. "My accountants need your signature as my spouse for the joint filing. Just sign on the dotted line so we can get back to celebrating." I looked down at the top page carefully disguised with a generic cover sheet, but I knew exactly what sat beneath it. These were the finalized fraudulent loan documents that would secure the $500,000 against my grandfather's property. Julian tapped a silver pen against the table, waiting for me to sign away my future. I stared at the silver pen Julian held out. The silence in the dining room pressed down on my shoulders. I kept my gaze lowered, letting my hands tremble to sell the illusion of a terrified, cornered wife. "What is the problem now?" Chloe Beatrice demanded from the other end of the table. She slammed her wineglass down hard. "My son is offering you the privilege of being part of his success, and you sit there shaking like a frightened mouse. You are holding him back. Julian and Marcus are brilliant black men building a technology empire, and you cannot even manage signing a routine document to support them." "It is just a lot of pages," I whispered, letting my voice crack. Maya rolled her eyes. "She cannot comprehend it, Mother. Her brain is wired for filing receipts and fetching coffee. Just sign the papers, Chloe, so we can move on. You are ruining the celebratory atmosphere." Marcus leaned back in his leather chair. "It is a standard corporate liability waiver and joint tax filing declaration, Chloe. Do not overthink it. Your signature authorizes the internal transfer of equity shares. Julian needs this finalized before the board meeting tomorrow morning." They were all in on it. Every one of them sat in this opulent room actively participating in a coordinated effort to steal my grandfather's property. They thought I was painfully stupid. They thought I was a stepping stone they could crush beneath their expensive shoes. I forced a single tear to slip down my cheek. I blinked rapidly, ensuring Julian saw the moisture. I reached into my canvas tote bag. "I will sign them, Julian," I said softly. "But I prefer to use my own pen. You know how superstitious I am about signing important things." Julian scoffed, waving his hand. "Fine. Use whatever cheap plastic pen you want. Just get it done." I slowly pulled out my sleek matte black fountain pen. As I uncapped it, I shifted my weight in the dining chair. My tote bag rested on the floor right next to Marcus's open leather briefcase. I leaned forward over the documents, dragging the process out. I made a show of slowly reading the dense legal text, squinting as if the complex financial jargon was overwhelming my simple mind. Under the table, my left hand slipped smoothly into my tote bag. I retrieved a tracking beacon no larger than a coin. With a swift, practiced motion, I dropped my napkin. As I bent down to retrieve it, my hand brushed against Marcus's briefcase. I slipped the magnetic tracker deep into the side pocket of his bag. I sat back up, smoothing my coat. I pressed the nib of my fountain pen against the heavy paper. The ink flowed in a rich, dark blue. I signed my name perfectly on the first page, then the second. I flipped through the stack, signing every guarantor line, every liability waiver, and every final authorization clause they had meticulously forged. With each stroke, I felt a surge of exhilarating power. Julian stood over me, watching the dark blue ink permanently bind me to $500,000 of fraudulent debt. He practically vibrated with greed. When I finished the final page, Julian snatched the stack of papers right out from under my hands. He quickly inspected the signatures, a massive, triumphant smile breaking across his face. He looked at Marcus and gave a subtle nod. The financial trap had been perfectly set. "There," Julian said, his voice dripping with condescension. "That was not so difficult, was it, Chloe? You finally managed to do something useful for my company." "Thank you, Julian," I murmured, capping my pen. What Julian did not know was that the rich dark blue ink inside my fountain pen was a highly specialized volatile polymer compound. It was specifically engineered for federal fraud sting operations. The chemical structure reacted with the oxygen in the air. Within exactly 24 hours, every single signature I had just applied to those documents would completely evaporate. The pages would be absolutely blank. When Marcus inevitably submitted those loan documents to the bank's automated processing center tomorrow morning, the system would instantly flag the empty signature blocks. The $500,000 transfer would be frozen mid-transaction, and the fraud prevention department would immediately lock down every single account associated with Julian's tech startup. I had just handed them a financial hand grenade, and they were celebrating pulling the pin. "You can leave now, Chloe," Beatrice announced, waving her hand toward the front door. "We have private family business to discuss. Let yourself out." "Yes, Beatrice," I quietly replied. I grabbed my worn canvas tote. I walked out, leaving them to their expensive wine and arrogant delusions. The cold night air hit my face as I stepped out of the suburban mansion and walked down the long, paved driveway toward the street. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I opened the encrypted messaging application. It was a direct message from my lead private investigator. He had been tailing Julian's mistress for the past 48 hours. The message contained a single high-resolution photograph. It was a picture of Victoria sitting in the VIP section of an exclusive downtown nightclub holding a glass of champagne and laughing brightly. But it was not her smile that made my blood run absolutely cold. It was the jewelry resting brightly against her collarbone. Victoria was wearing a breathtaking $50,000 diamond and sapphire necklace. It was a custom antique piece entirely unmistakable. It was my mother's heirloom necklace. The necklace I kept locked inside a secure safe in the master bedroom of the house I shared with Julian. He had stolen my dead mother's jewelry and given it to his mistress to wear at a nightclub. The financial theft was business, but this was deeply personal. Julian had just made the absolute biggest mistake of his rapidly collapsing, pathetic life. The morning sun had barely breached the Chicago skyline when the aggressive pounding started on my apartment door. I was already awake, standing in the kitchen in my cheap polyester suit, monitoring the blinking red dot on my secure tablet. The tracking beacon I had slipped into Marcus's briefcase the night before was actively pinging from the heart of the financial district. He was heading straight for the central bank branch to deposit the fraudulent loan documents. The volatile polymer compound inside the ink was already breaking down molecularly. I had roughly 14 hours until the signatures on those papers evaporated completely into thin air. The pounding grew louder, rattling the cheap brass peephole. I locked the tablet screen, slipped it into my canvas tote bag, and walked over to unlock the deadbolt. The door immediately flew open. Beatrice pushed her way inside, wearing a pristine white cashmere coat, followed closely by Maya, who held a steaming designer coffee cup. They did not wait for an invitation. They stepped into my modest living room, looking around the space with absolute, unconcealed disgust. Maya held out her manicured hand palm facing up. "Hand over the keys, Chloe. We are in a massive rush. Keys to what I asked," keeping my voice carefully neutral. "Your sedan." Maya snapped, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "Victoria needs a safe, reliable car to get around the city today for her Pilates class and some shopping errands. Julian promised her she could use yours since you never go anywhere important. You can just take the Blue Line bus to your little bookkeeping job." I stared at my sister-in-law. Julian had stolen my dead mother's diamond and sapphire heirloom necklace to give to his mistress last night, and this morning he was dispatching his family to confiscate my only mode of transportation so that same mistress could run errands comfortably. The sheer coordinated audacity of this family was staggering. "No," I said simply. "I need my car to get to work. I need my—" Beatrice whipped her head around, her eyes narrowing into hostile slits. "Excuse me, did you just tell my daughter no? The car is registered solely in my name, Beatrice," I replied, holding my ground. "Victoria cannot have it." Beatrice closed the distance between us in 2 quick steps. She raised her hand and struck me hard across the left side of my face. The sharp slap echoed loudly in the small apartment. The force of the blow snapped my head to the side, leaving a burning red handprint blooming across my cheek. "You are a selfish, ugly college dropout," Beatrice hissed, leaning in so close I could smell the expensive mints on her breath. "You are an absolute parasite on this family. You do not deserve a brilliant man like Julian. He dragged you out of poverty, he gave you his prestigious last name, and he pays for the very roof over your head. You have the absolute nerve to deny him a simple favor when he is out there building an empire. You hold him back every single day. I did not flinch. I did not raise a trembling hand to soothe my stinging cheek. I did not cry the way the old Chloe would have. I simply turned my head back slowly and looked directly into Beatrice's furious, widened eyes. I deliberately turned my gaze to the digital clock on the microwave. 8:15 in the morning. The bank would be opening soon. Julian does not pay for this apartment, Beatrice, I said, my voice dropping to a cold, dead calm. He told you he leased this cheap place for me because his startup required him to stay at the downtown mansion incubator. He lied to you. He has never paid a dime for this unit. This apartment is a secured corporate lease. Maya scoffed, crossing her arms and rolling her eyes. What corporate lease? You punch numbers at a strip mall accounting desk. You think I failed out of university because I was too stupid to handle the coursework? I continued stepping forward and forcing Beatrice to take a half step backward. You think I am an uneducated burden your son graciously tolerates for appearances? But if you damage a single piece of property in this unit, or refuse to leave, you will not be dealing with Julian. You will be dealing with a team of ruthless federal corporate attorneys who specialize in prosecuting trespassing and asset destruction. I suggest you both walk out the door right now before I trigger the silent security alarm. Beatrice stared at me, her mouth slightly parted. For a fraction of a second, she looked genuinely unnerved. She had expected me to crumble to the floor weeping and apologizing, begging for her forgiveness, just like I always did. Instead, she was staring into the eyes of a woman who had spent the last 5 years tracking international money laundering syndicates for the government. Maya grabbed her mother's arm, pulling her toward the hallway. She is delusional, Mom. Julian warned us she was having a mental breakdown from the stress of his success. Let us just go. We will handle the car situation another way. Beatrice recovered her haughty composure, smoothing her pristine cashmere coat. You are deeply unwell, Chloe. Julian is going to hear about this blatant disrespect and there will be consequences. They walked out, slamming the heavy door behind them. I exhaled a slow, measured breath. The sting on my cheek was a temporary physical sensation, but the adrenaline flooding my veins was sharp and permanent. I grabbed my worn canvas tote bag, making sure my secure laptop and tablet were safely zipped inside. I needed to get to my actual downtown office to execute the next phase of the asset recovery regarding my mother's stolen necklace. I locked the apartment door and walked down the concrete stairwell to the resident parking garage beneath the building. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I approached my designated parking space. I stopped dead in my tracks. Space 42 was completely empty. My modest silver sedan was gone. A bright orange sticker was slapped onto the concrete pillar directly behind my parking spot. I walked over and peeled the heavy adhesive off the wall. It was a formal towing notification citing unauthorized vehicle placement. I read the fine print printed at the bottom of the notice. The impound lot and towing company listed was Elite Recovery Services. Elite Recovery Services was a notorious shell company owned entirely by Marcus's cousin. They had not just asked for my keys upstairs. They had preemptively stolen my vehicle, using Marcus's shady family connections while Beatrice and Maya provided the morning distraction at my front door. They legally stole my car, leaving me stranded, while Victoria drove my vehicle around Chicago, wearing my dead mother's diamonds. I crushed the orange sticker in my fist. I dropped the crumpled orange towing sticker onto the cold concrete floor of the parking garage. If Beatrice and Maya believed stranding me in the suburbs would induce a weeping panic attack, they vastly underestimated my resources. I pulled out my phone and ordered a premium black car service. I did not shed a single tear over the stolen sedan. I had much larger targets to dismantle today. 40 minutes later, my hired car pulled up to the curb of a gleaming high-rise in the heart of the Chicago financial district. I walked through the revolving glass doors, bypassing the main security desk with a quick scan of my biometric identification badge. I stepped into the private executive elevator and pressed the button for the penthouse. The silver doors slid open to reveal a sprawling, pristine office space defined by floor-to-ceiling glass walls and sleek, minimalist architecture. The brushed steel lettering on the reception wall read, Vanguard Forensic Audit and Asset Recovery. "Good morning, Ms. Sterling," my executive assistant greeted me, handing me a freshly brewed espresso. "The European banking regulators sent over the encrypted ledgers you requested last night." "Thank you, David," I replied, taking the coffee. "Hold all my calls for the next hour. I am running a live tracking operation." I walked into my massive corner office overlooking the city skyline and locked the heavy oak door behind me. I set my worn canvas tote bag on my mahogany desk and pulled out my secure tablet. I was not a lowly bookkeeping clerk punching a calculator at a strip mall. I was the chief executive officer of one of the most ruthless financial investigative firms in the Midwest. I built this entire empire from the ground up while Julian was busy playing pretend tech visionary in his sister's guest house. I booted up my custom dual-monitor workstation and activated the tracking software linked to the beacon I had slipped into Marcus's briefcase. A digital map of the city materialized on the large screen. The blinking red dot representing Marcus was no longer anywhere near the central bank branch. It had moved north. I zoomed in on the coordinates. The beacon was stationary at a commercial address on the Gold Coast, Platinum European Motors. It was an ultra-exclusive luxury car dealership specializing in imported sports cars. My fingers flew across my mechanical keyboard. If Marcus was at a luxury dealership first thing in the morning, Julian was absolutely with him. I ran a rapid penetration protocol on the dealership's unencrypted commercial security network. For a business handling million-dollar automotive inventory, their cybersecurity firewall was laughably pathetic. Within 60 seconds, I bypassed their guest network and hijacked the internal showroom camera feeds. I routed the security footage to my secondary monitor. Camera 4 provided a crystal-clear, high-definition view of the VIP sales lounge. There was Julian lounging on a white leather sofa looking incredibly smug in his tailored suit. Marcus sat next to him with his leather briefcase resting on the glass coffee table exactly where my tracker was transmitting from. And there was Victoria. She was draped over Julian's shoulder, giggling and pointing through the glass partition at a pristine, custom-ordered Porsche Carrera. Even through the security feed, I could clearly see what rested against her collarbone. She was wearing the $50,000 diamond and sapphire necklace Julian had stolen from my secure safe. My mother had worked her entire life to preserve that heirloom for me, and Julian had casually handed it to his mistress to wear while shopping for a sports car. A cold, ruthless calm settled completely over me. I pulled up the secure federal banking portal my firm utilizes to monitor flagged corporate transactions. I ran a targeted query cross-referencing Julian's personal identification numbers and his startup's employer identification number. The system instantly populated a pending wire transfer. Julian was actively attempting to wire $180,000 directly to Platinum European Motors. He was using the routing number attached to the Project Apex bridge loan. He genuinely believed the bank had processed the $500,000 loan secured against my grandfather's commercial property. He was entirely wrong. I accessed the Central Clearinghouse digital database to view the finalized loan documents submitted by Marcus an hour earlier. I pulled the scanned PDF onto my screen and zoomed in on the final guarantor pages. The signature lines were completely flawlessly blank. The highly specialized volatile polymer ink inside my fountain pen had executed its chemical reaction perfectly. Exposed to oxygen for 24 hours, every single stroke of my signature had evaporated, leaving zero trace on the paper. The automated fraud detection system at the central bank operated exactly as I anticipated. When Marcus's digital submission hit the underwriting algorithm, the system immediately detected an unsigned high-risk collateral document requesting $500,000. On my screen, I watched the automated federal protocols trigger in real time. The mid-transfer wire to the dealership hit a hard digital wall. The transaction was blocked. But the system did not stop there. The federal fraud alert cascaded through the banking network. Within seconds, every single account linked to Julian and Marcus was frozen. Julian's personal checking was locked. His startup's operational funds were seized. Marcus's offshore holding accounts were immediately flagged for federal review. I turned my attention back to the live dealership security feed. The sales manager walked back into the VIP lounge. He was no longer smiling. He held a tablet in his hands and shook his head, speaking directly to Julian. Julian's arrogant demeanor shattered instantly. He stood up abruptly, his face flushing an angry crimson. He pointed a manicured finger at the manager, screaming something aggressive, his jaw tight with absolute rage. Victoria stepped back from him, looking confused and deeply embarrassed as the other wealthy patrons in the showroom turned to stare at the commotion. Marcus scrambled to open his briefcase. He pulled out his laptop, frantically typing on the keyboard to check the corporate accounts. I watched his shoulders drop as he undoubtedly discovered the terrifying reality of a total federal asset freeze. Zero access. Zero funds. The sales manager stepped away from Julian and calmly picked up the desk phone on the counter. In the background of the camera feed just outside the floor-to-ceiling showroom windows, I watched two black and white Chicago Police Department cruisers quietly pull up to the curb. Their red and blue emergency lights flashed brilliantly against the sleek hood of the unpaid Porsche. I watched the police officers physically block the dealership exit on my monitor before calmly shutting down the encrypted feed. I leaned back in my leather executive chair and took a slow sip of my espresso. The trap had been flawlessly sprung. Now I just had to wait for the financial venom to spread through his entire life. Exactly 1 week later, the heavy smell of roasted turkey and caramelized sage filled the suffocating air of Julian's suburban mansion. It was Thanksgiving Day, and the tension inside the house was thick enough to slice with a carving knife. For 7 straight days, Julian had been trapped in a state of perpetually escalating panic. He spent every waking hour pacing the hardwood floors, screaming into his cell phone and leaving unhinged voicemails for various banking executives. He blamed systemic glitches and automated routing errors for his universally declined credit cards and frozen accounts. He remained completely oblivious to the fact that he was currently the prime target of an active federal fraud investigation. To cope with his profound financial impotence, he directed every ounce of his boiling rage at me. He treated me less like a wife and more like an indentured servant. "Get back in the kitchen, Chloe," Julian snapped, waving his hand dismissively from the living room sofa. "The stuffed mushrooms are getting cold and Victoria has an empty glass. Stop standing around looking completely useless and do your job." Victoria was lounging comfortably in my favorite leather armchair, wearing a designer silk dress and the very same diamond and sapphire necklace Julian had stolen from my secure safe. She was not introduced to the family as his mistress, of course. She was officially presented as a crucial venture capitalist and a highly respected special holiday guest. Beatrice sat next to her on the sofa, practically fawning over the younger woman, while completely ignoring my presence in the room. Marcus stood by the fireplace, nursing a scotch, looking considerably more haggard and sleep-deprived than he had a week ago. The offshore asset freeze was clearly taking a massive toll on his nerves. I did exactly as I was told. I lowered my eyes, retreated to the massive marble kitchen, and loaded a heavy silver tray with warm hors d'oeuvres. I played the role of the submissive, defeated wife to absolute perfection. I served them their hot food. I refilled their expensive drinks. I quietly washed their dirty prep plates while they laughed and drank vintage wine that Julian had purchased on credit right before his accounts locked down tight. When it was finally time for the main course, I carried the massive roasted turkey out to the formal dining room. The long mahogany table was set with fine china and heavy crystal goblets. Julian sat at the head of the table, acting the part of the wealthy patriarch. Victoria was seated directly to his right in the position of ultimate honor. I was relegated to the far end nearest the swinging kitchen door. Before I could even pull out my chair to sit down, Maya stood up. She tapped her manicured fingernail against the side of her crystal wine glass. The sharp ringing sound instantly silenced the room. "Before we begin eating, I would like to propose a very important toast," Maya announced, beaming brightly at Victoria. "This Thanksgiving, I am incredibly grateful for new beginnings and brilliant strategic partnerships. I am thrilled to officially announce to the family that Victoria has agreed to be the primary financial backer for my new luxury wellness brand. With her substantial capital investment, we are going to completely revolutionize the holistic health market. Beatrice clapped her hands together in absolute delight. Oh, Maya, that is simply wonderful news. I always knew you were destined for greatness. It takes a certain high caliber of woman to truly understand complex business strategy. Maya smirked, picking up her glass and turning her gaze directly toward my end of the table. Her eyes were cold and brimming with overt condescension. Exactly, Mother. It just goes to show that some women are born to build empires while others are only meant to wash dishes. Julian laughed out loud, a harsh barking sound of approval. Marcus chuckled quietly into his glass of scotch. Victoria offered a polite, pitying smile in my general direction. They all sat there comfortably basking in their shared delusion of superiority. They thought this was my ultimate public humiliation. They thought they had finally broken my spirit into a million tiny pieces. I kept my face entirely blank. I did not react to the blatant insult. I did not shed a tear. Instead, I stood up slowly from my chair and picked up the heavy bottle of vintage Bordeaux resting in the center of the table. Allow me to top off your glass, Victoria, I said, my voice soft and perfectly subservient. To celebrate your new empire. I walked slowly around the long dining table, my footsteps silent on the expensive Persian rug. I stopped right behind Victoria's tall chair. As I poured the dark red wine into her crystal glass, I leaned down slightly. My face was mere inches from her ear. The scent of her expensive floral perfume filled my nose, but my eyes were fixed entirely on the heavy sparkling diamonds resting against her collarbone. That is a truly stunning piece of jewelry, I whispered, my voice so quiet and smooth that only she could hear my words. The vintage sapphire cut is absolutely unmistakable. Victoria preened slightly, tilting her chin up to show off the stones. Thank you so much. It is a custom antique. I know, I murmured, leaning in just a fraction of an inch closer. It belonged to my deceased mother, and it is highly illegal to traffic stolen property across state lines. Did you know the intricate gold clasp has a micro-serial number laser etched into the metal? That specific number is registered directly with Interpol's Stolen Art and Jewelry Division. The very second you try to insure it or pawn it, federal agents will kick down your front door and arrest you for grand larceny. Victoria froze instantly. Her entire body went completely rigid in the plush dining chair. The color drained from her face so incredibly fast she looked physically ill. Her breathing stopped in her throat. She stared straight ahead, her eyes wide with sudden absolute terror. Her right hand spasmed violently. The delicate crystal wineglass slipped right through her trembling fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp, deafening crack, shattering into dozens of jagged, dangerous pieces. The dark vintage Bordeaux splashed across the polished wood, pooling like fresh, thick blood around the carved legs of her chair. The entire dining room plunged into a stunned, dead silence. Julian shot out of his chair, his face twisting into an ugly, terrifying mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He did not care about the broken glass or the ruined wine. He cared that his perfect holiday facade was cracking in front of his supposed investor. He stormed around the table, closing the distance between us in 3 massive, furious strides. He grabbed me forcefully by the shoulders and shoved me hard backward. I stumbled, catching my heel on the edge of the expensive rug, but managed to keep my balance before hitting the wall. "What is wrong with you?" Julian screamed, his voice echoing violently off the high ceiling. The thick veins in his neck bulged against his stiff white collar. "You clumsy, incompetent idiot. You are ruining absolutely everything today. I am entirely sick of looking at your pathetic, miserable face. Pack your bags right now and get out of my house." I looked at his furious red face. I looked at Victoria, who was still trembling violently in her chair, clutching the stolen necklace against her chest like a live, unpinned hand grenade. I looked at Beatrice and Maya, who were staring at me with open, unfiltered disgust. "Yes, Julian," I said quietly, smoothing the front of my simple dress. I turned my back on all of them and walked calmly toward the grand staircase. Julian truly believed he was asserting his dominance by kicking me out onto the street. He had absolutely no idea he had just handed me the perfect, flawless exit strategy right before the federal indictments crashed down on his head. Before my hand could even touch the mahogany banister of the grand staircase, Julian's voice cracked through the heavy air of the dining room like a whip. "Stop right there, Chloe! We are not entirely finished." I turned back slowly. Julian had marched back to his seat at the head of the table. He reached beneath his heavy leather chair and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He slammed it down onto the mahogany wood right next to the massive roasted turkey. He ripped the top open and violently yanked out a dense stack of legal documents, tossing them across the table toward me. "I am not just kicking you out," he sneered, his chest heaving with exertion. "I am legally excising you from my life and my empire. These are expedited divorce filings. My legal team drafted them this morning." Maya clapped her hands together, a wide, vicious smile breaking across her face. "Finally, Julian, it is about time you cut the dead weight loose." I walked back to the table and picked up the thick stack of papers. I flipped through the first few pages, reading the dense legal jargon with practiced ease. Julian was not just asking for a dissolution of marriage, he was demanding a comprehensive financial surrender. "You are demanding spousal support?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly flat. Julian crossed his arms over his chest, lifting his chin in absolute arrogance. "You owe me, Chloe. You have been a relentless emotional drain on my productivity. My attorneys calculated the monetary value of the stress I endured while dragging you into high society. The filings stipulate that you will pay me $5,000 a month in alimony. Furthermore, you are surrendering your entire corporate 401k retirement fund to me as compensation for the time I wasted trying to elevate you. Sign them right now and leave." Beatrice took a delicate sip of her water, looking at me with pure, unadulterated contempt. "You should consider yourself lucky he is letting you leave with the clothes on your back. You came into this family with absolutely nothing, and you will leave with absolutely nothing." I looked at Victoria. She had not moved a single inch. She was still sitting in her chair, completely paralyzed, staring at the shattered wine glass on the floor, while her right hand remained clamped tightly over the stolen sapphire necklace. She was not listening to a single word of Julian's divorce speech. Her mind was entirely consumed by the realization that she was wearing stolen property registered with international authorities. I pulled my sleek fountain pen from my pocket. I did not argue. I did not fight. I leaned over the dining table and signed my name on the final page of the divorce decree, using the exact same volatile polymer ink I had used on his fraudulent bank loans. By tomorrow morning, those signatures would completely evaporate, rendering the entire divorce filing legally void, and keeping his assets legally tied to mine, right as the federal asset seizure protocols reached their absolute peak. I capped my pen and placed the documents back in front of Julian. "You will have everything you deserve, Julian. I promise you that." I turned and walked up the grand staircase, leaving them to revel in their false victory. I entered the master bedroom and walked straight to my closet. I pulled down a single small black leather duffel bag. I did not touch the designer dresses, the expensive shoes, or the luxury handbags Julian had purchased on credit to make me look like a suitable trophy wife. I packed exactly 3 things: a simple change of clothes, my encrypted physical hard drive, and my passport. The bedroom door creaked open. Beatrice stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a triumphant smirk. "Make sure you do not steal any of the jewelry Julian bought for you," she commanded, her eyes scanning my small bag. "I will have the housekeeper inventory this room the second you are gone." I zipped the duffel bag closed. "I am taking nothing that belongs to this family, Beatrice." "Good," she scoffed, flipping her perfect hair over her shoulder. "The weather is dropping below freezing tonight, Chloe. I hope you packed a warm sweater. I hear the downtown homeless shelters fill up incredibly fast during the Thanksgiving holiday. Enjoy the reality of your miserable little life." I did not grace her with a response. I slipped the strap of the duffel bag over my shoulder and walked past her out of the bedroom. I descended the stairs and walked straight through the grand foyer. I did not look back at the dining room. I opened the heavy oak front door and stepped out into the crisp, freezing November night. The cold wind whipped against my face as I walked down the long paved driveway. My hired black car service was already waiting at the curb, idling quietly beneath the streetlights. I stopped halfway down the driveway and pulled my encrypted smartphone from my coat pocket. I opened a highly secured proprietary application. Julian constantly bragged to his venture capitalist friends about this suburban mansion. He boasted about the military-grade smart home security system, the titanium-reinforced electronic deadbolts, and the impact-resistant glass. He claimed he bought the property in cash to serve as the ultimate safe haven for his brilliant tech incubator. The reality was vastly different. 6 months ago, when Julian's credit was already severely overextended, he desperately needed a physical luxury address to legitimize his startup to new investors. I facilitated the transaction through a blind real estate trust called Vanguard Property Holdings. Julian signed a complex residential lease agreement that he neglected to read properly, believing it was a standard mortgage transfer. I am the sole managing director of Vanguard Property Holdings. Julian did not own this house. I was his landlord, and he had just violated several very specific behavioral clauses in the lease agreement. I tapped the screen of my phone, accessing the master security matrix for the entire property. The system interface glowed brightly in the dark. I selected the emergency protocol designated for hostile tenant evictions. I slid into the back seat of my waiting car and closed the heavy door. I looked out the tinted window at the glowing windows of the mansion. I pressed the red execution button on my screen. Instantly, every single light inside the massive house abruptly cut out, plunging the entire property into total, suffocating darkness. A split second later, the loud mechanical thud of titanium deadbolts engaging echoed clearly across the quiet suburban lawn. Every exterior door and window electronically locked from the inside, sealing the house shut like a maximum security vault. Then the sirens began. Deafening high-decibel security alarms designed to completely disorient hostile intruders erupted from every speaker inside the house. The piercing shriek vibrated through the cold air outside. Julian, Beatrice, Maya, and the terrified Victoria were now hopelessly trapped inside a pitch-black acoustic torture chamber with absolutely no way to manually override the system. "Drive, please," I said to the driver, settling back into the plush leather seat. As the car pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the quiet street traffic, I checked my secondary tablet. The Chicago Police Dispatch showed 2 squad cars currently en route to the mansion, responding to an anonymous tip regarding the location of a stolen $50,000 sapphire necklace. They would be arriving in exactly 4 minutes. Through my secure remote tablet, I watched the pathetic conclusion to Julian's Thanksgiving ambush. The Chicago police had arrived at the mansion exactly 4 minutes after my hired car pulled away. They found the property completely locked down, with deafening emergency sirens blaring into the freezing night. Because the smart home utilized military-grade impact-resistant glass, the authorities could not simply breach the front door. They were forced to verify the Interpol flag on the sapphire necklace before calling in the fire department. It took them until dawn to finally smash through a reinforced patio door with a hydraulic battering ram. The camera feed captured Victoria being dragged out in handcuffs, sobbing hysterically as federal agents seized the stolen heirloom. Julian, Maya, and Marcus were forced to crawl through the shattered glass looking like exhausted feral animals. Julian was beyond humiliated. He was rabid. I knew his bruised ego would not allow him to process his failure without seeking a physical target to intimidate. He would come looking for me. I was already waiting for him. I sat behind my massive mahogany desk at Vanguard Forensic Audit and Asset Recovery. I wore a tailored midnight blue power suit, my hair pulled back into a severe sleek twist. My office occupied the entire penthouse floor of a premier high-rise in the financial district. The floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered an unobstructed panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. Downstairs in the gleaming marble lobby, Julian stormed through the revolving doors flanked by Maya. They marched straight up to the high-end security desk. I tapped into the lobby audio feed from my computer terminal to listen to the confrontation. "I demand to see Chloe," Julian barked at the head security guard, slamming his hand on the marble counter. She works here as a low-level bookkeeping clerk. Tell her Julian is downstairs, and she has exactly 30 seconds to get down here before I drag her out of her cubicle myself." The seasoned security guard raised an eyebrow, looking at Julian's rumpled designer suit covered in white dust from the shattered patio glass. He let out a low, booming laugh, shaking his head. "There are no bookkeeping cubicles in this building, sir," the guard replied, his tone dripping with amusement. "And nobody drags that woman anywhere." He reached over and tapped the digital directory screen mounted on the wall. "I suggest you read the executive listing before you start making threats." I watched on the monitor as Julian and Maya leaned in to read the glowing text. The top line displayed my name in bold silver letters. Chloe Vance, founder and managing partner, Vanguard Enterprises. Maya physically recoiled, covering her mouth with her hand. Julian stared at the screen as if it were written in an alien language. The guard pressed a button under his desk. "Ms. Vance is expecting you in the penthouse," the guard stated, motioning toward the private glass elevator. "Try not to make a mess on the way up." The heavy oak doors to my office flew open. Julian stormed inside, followed closely by a deeply unnerved Maya. Julian stopped dead in his tracks the moment he registered the sheer scale of the room. He stared at the priceless modern art, the custom leather furniture, and the massive brushed steel Vanguard logo mounted on the wall directly behind me. "What kind of sick joke is this?" Julian demanded, his voice wavering between rage and absolute confusion. "Whose office are you hiding in, Chloe? Where is your manager? I am going to have you arrested for what you did to my house last night." "You are standing in my office, Julian," I replied, remaining seated. I rested my elbows on the pristine desk, steepling my fingers. "And it is not your house. It never was." Julian marched forward, placing his hands flat on my desk and leaning over to intimidate me. "You hacked my smart home system. You called the police on Victoria. You embarrassed me in front of my primary investor. You are going to pay for this." I opened my top drawer and pulled out a thick red legal binder. I tossed it across the desk. It landed heavily, hitting Julian's knuckles. "Victoria is currently sitting in federal holding, awaiting transfer for possession of stolen international artifacts," I stated coldly. "Your brilliant primary investor is entirely bankrupt and facing 10 years in federal prison. And regarding your house, I suggest you open that binder." Julian snatched the binder and flipped it open. His eyes darted across the pages. Maya crept up behind him, reading over his shoulder. "This is an eviction notice." Julian stammered, his arrogance faltering as his eyes scanned the dense legal text. "A notice of default. This is insane. I leased that property from a corporate entity, Vanguard Holdings. My startup pays the lease." "Your startup missed the last 2 monthly payments, Julian," I explained, leaning back in my chair. "You prioritized buying vintage wine and leasing a Porsche for your mistress over paying your residential lease. The contract you signed contained a strict 60-day default clause. Vanguard Holdings executed that clause at midnight. I am the sole managing partner of Vanguard. You have been officially evicted, and the property is currently under foreclosure for immediate asset recovery." "You are Vanguard," Julian whispered, the color draining completely from his face as his brain finally caught up to reality. "You own the holding company. I own the holding company. I own the asset recovery firm, and I now own every single piece of equity your pathetic tech startup claimed to possess," I replied, my voice sharp as broken glass. "You thought you were keeping me around as a convenient trophy to manage your domestic life. You never realized I was managing your entire financial execution." Maya stumbled backward, hitting a leather armchair. She had spent years treating me like dirt on her expensive shoes, and now she was standing in an office she could never afford to rent, realizing I controlled her brother's entire existence. Before Julian could muster a response, the oak doors burst open for a second time. Marcus stumbled into the office. He looked as though he had been hit by a speeding freight train. He was hyperventilating, his tie loosened, and sweat pouring down his forehead. He gripped the doorframe to keep his knees from buckling. "Julian, we have a massive catastrophic problem." Marcus gasped, his chest heaving as he struggled to pull air into his lungs. "What now?" Julian snapped, whirling around to face his business partner. Is the bank still blocking the transfer? Did you fix the fraud alert? It is not the bank. Marcus choked out, his eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. The SEC just breached our headquarters. Federal agents are confiscating all the servers, the encrypted hard drives, and the physical ledgers. They are tearing the walls apart, Julian. They are raiding the startup. Marcus lunged forward, his hands slamming onto my polished desk, right next to Julian's trembling fingers. He leaned his entire body weight over the mahogany surface, trying to tower over me. He puffed out his chest, attempting to channel the aggressive corporate intimidation tactics he used to bully junior analysts and rival board members. His face was a mask of desperate hostility. "You listen to me, you vindictive little bookkeeper!" Marcus snarled, his voice vibrating with manufactured rage. "I am going to bury you. I will have our legal team draft an injunction so fast your head will spin. You are going to prison for corporate espionage, wire fraud, and digital trespassing. Hacking into a secure financial institution is a federal offense. I will make sure you never see the outside of a jail cell." I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I calmly stood up from my executive chair, smoothing the crisp lines of my blazer. I walked around the massive desk, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. I approached the sleek frosted glass wall that spanned the entire length of my office. It doubled as a presentation whiteboard. I picked up a thick black dry erase marker and uncapped it. "I did not hack a single thing, Marcus," I stated, my voice echoing clearly through the cavernous penthouse office. "Hacking implies I bypassed your security protocols, but you and Julian never actually possessed any real security. You possessed arrogance." I turned to the glass wall and began to draw. I started with a single circle, labeling it with the name of their flagship tech startup. I drew a sharp black line connecting it to a second circle, labeling that one with the name of their primary offshore holding company in the Cayman Islands. As a fully licensed forensic auditor, I operate entirely within the bounds of international financial law. I explained, my marker squeaking against the glass, as I rapidly mapped out their entire illicit financial ecosystem. Everything I needed was sitting in plain sight on public ledgers and open-source corporate registries. You were just too arrogant to properly obscure your digital footprint. You funneled investor capital straight from your Series A funding round directly into this dummy corporation. You declared the capital as operational losses and research expenditures. Then you washed the money through a series of shell companies and transferred it back into your personal luxury accounts as tax-free consultation fees. Marcus swallowed hard, the color draining from his face, as he watched me diagram his exact laundering strategy with terrifying precision. "But how did you bypass the encrypted authorization protocols?" Julian demanded, his voice cracking as he stared at the glass wall. "Those ledgers require two-factor biometric authentication. You could not possibly access those transfer dates without my personal device." I turned to look at Julian, a cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. "I did use your device, Julian. I used the exact metadata you willingly handed to me. Do you remember that morning on the commuter train? The morning you shoved your unlocked smartphone directly into my chest, demanding that I fix your formatting errors on a basic pitch deck. You were too busy boasting to the entire train car to realize you had left your phone connected to a public commercial network with your administrative portals running actively in the background. You practically handed me the cryptographic keys to your entire financial kingdom while treating me like your personal secretary." Maya let out a harsh, nervous laugh, crossing her arms defensively over her chest. "Well, this is all very fascinating, Chloe," she sneered, trying to mask her rising panic with her usual brand of toxic superiority. "But Julian and Marcus are the sole managing directors of the tech startup. Their financial mismanagement has absolutely nothing to do with me. I am entirely insulated from their corporate fraud. I have my own independent venture." I turned my attention squarely to Maya. I raised the black marker and drew one final heavy line across the glass wall. I connected the Cayman Island Holding Company directly to a brand new circle. I wrote the name of her luxury wellness brand in large, bold letters right in the center. "You are not insulated, Maya," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously low register. You are the keystone of the entire operation. Maya physically recoiled, her back hitting the doorframe. What are you talking about? She whispered, her arrogant facade instantly shattering. Julian and Marcus needed a clean domestic entity to reintegrate the washed offshore funds back into the American banking system, I explained, tapping the glass with my marker for emphasis. Your luxury wellness brand was never a legitimate business, Maya. It was a glorified washing machine. They pumped millions of dollars of illicit investor capital into your company under the guise of venture backing. You signed the incorporation documents. You filed the quarterly tax returns claiming those fraudulent investments as legitimate retail revenue. Maya looked frantically at Julian, her eyes wide with terror. Julian, tell her she is lying. Tell her my company is clean. Julian could not look at her. He stared down at his shoes, his jaw clenched tight. You are the sole registered proprietor of a massive money laundering front. Maya, I continued, the reality of her situation crashing down on her shoulders. The Internal Revenue Service does not care if you are ignorant of the logistics. You signed the federal tax declarations. You are currently the prime suspect in an active federal tax evasion investigation. The SEC agents raiding your brother's startup right now are just the opening act. The IRS agents will be waiting for you at your wellness boutique before lunch. Maya let out a choked sob, her legs giving out completely. She slid down the door frame, collapsing onto the expensive Persian rug, clutching her head in her hands. She finally understood that her empire of superiority was built entirely on federal crimes. Marcus backed away from my desk, his breathing shallow and rapid. He patted his pockets, frantically searching for his car keys. We need to leave Julian, he stammered, a wild, desperate look in his eyes. We need to get to the private airstrip. We have to leave the country before they freeze our passports. Before Marcus could take another step toward the door, his cell phone erupted with a shrill, ringing tone. The loud, sudden noise made all three of them jump. Marcus pulled the phone from his jacket pocket with trembling hands. The caller ID flashed brightly on the screen. It was Beatrice. Marcus answered the call, his hand shaking so violently he nearly dropped the device. He pressed the phone to his ear, but the volume was turned up loud enough that Beatrice's hysterical screaming echoed clearly across my quiet office. Marcus! Where is my son? Beatrice shrieked, her voice completely unhinged and frantic. You need to get Julian on the phone right this second. Federal agents are standing in my living room. They have a federal warrant. They are asking about the fraudulent loan Julian took out. They are seizing my house, Marcus. They are taking absolutely everything. Marcus stared at Julian with wild, bloodshot eyes before his frantic gaze slowly shifted across the penthouse office. I left them standing in my office, paralyzed by their complete and utter destruction, and walked out to get my morning espresso. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a quiet corner booth of an upscale downtown coffee shop, reviewing a digital portfolio on my tablet. The bell above the door chimed, and Victoria rushed inside. She looked entirely disheveled, her designer clothes wrinkled from a night in a holding cell. She scanned the room, spotted me, and immediately marched over to my table. She slid into the booth across from me, her eyes darting around nervously. I need your help, Chloe, she whispered, leaning across the table. I know you are working with the authorities. I know you orchestrated all of this. Julian is going down, and I refuse to go to prison for his mistakes. I will testify against him and Marcus. I will give the federal prosecutors everything they need in exchange for full immunity. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, observing her frantic energy. Victoria tried to play the victim immediately. Julian manipulated me, Chloe, she pleaded, clasping her hands together. He told me he was a billionaire. He promised me a life of luxury. I had no idea he was running a fraudulent tech startup. I am completely innocent in all of this. I was just a naive girl who fell for the wrong man. I placed my coffee cup down on the saucer. You are a terrible liar, Victoria, I stated, my tone completely void of sympathy. And you are incredibly foolish. You managed to hide that stolen sapphire necklace in your boot during the police raid last night, but you are stupid enough to wear it right now. Victoria froze, her hand instantly flying up to her neck. The unmistakable gold chain was clearly visible, peeking out from beneath the collar of her silk blouse. She had bailed herself out of federal holding and immediately put the stolen artifact back on, likely intending to pawn it for escape funds. I will pass your contact information to the federal prosecutors, I told her, leaning forward slightly. But we are going to do this on my terms. You will take off my mother's necklace and hand it to me right now. Then you are going to take this pen and sign a full written confession detailing your exact involvement in Maya's fake wellness brand. Victoria swallowed hard, staring at the sleek fountain pen I pushed across the table. She reached behind her neck, her fingers trembling as she unclasped the heavy sapphire necklace. She slid the sparkling diamonds across the table toward me. She picked up the pen and quickly scrawled her signature on the legal document I provided, officially binding her to the money laundering scheme. I will tell them everything, she promised, standing up from the booth. I will tell them how Julian falsified the revenue reports. But if you really want to destroy them, you need to look closer at Marcus. I paused, sliding the necklace into my pocket. What about Marcus? Victoria leaned down, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Marcus did not just steal venture capital from the tech startup Chloe. He was the one funding Maya's wellness brand initially. He drained the private retirement funds of dozens of elderly people in his own community to cover their early operating losses. With that final devastating bombshell, Victoria turned and practically sprinted out of the coffee shop, leaving me alone with the written confession and a brand new trail of financial blood to follow. The pieces of the puzzle were finally snapping together with absolute terrifying clarity. I spent the remainder of the afternoon cross-referencing the banking details Victoria had frantically provided. I traced the specific routing numbers directly through a labyrinth of shell companies straight into Marcus and Julian's hidden offshore accounts. By early evening, I had finished compiling the entire physical dossier. I returned to my new residence, a sprawling ultra-luxury condominium located on the top floor of a highly secure building overlooking Lake Michigan. The space was a minimalist sanctuary of white marble polished steel and floor-to-ceiling glass. It was a massive, beautiful contrast to the suffocating heavy mahogany of Julian's fraudulent suburban mansion. I poured myself a glass of vintage red wine and stood by the window watching the city lights flicker to life, reflecting off the dark water. My quiet evening was abruptly shattered by the sharp, aggressive buzzing of my front door intercom. I walked over to the security monitor mounted on the wall. Beatrice was glaring directly into the camera lens. Her perfect salon blowout was a frayed, messy disaster, and her expensive cashmere coat was hastily buttoned unevenly. She had clearly bullied or bribed a delivery person to tailgate her way past the notoriously strict lobby concierge. She jabbed the buzzer a second time, her face contorted with sheer entitled rage. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy oak door open just enough to block the threshold. I did not invite her inside. "Chloe, you vindictive, spiteful little girl," Beatrice hissed, attempting to push her physical weight past me. I held my ground. My arm braced firmly against the doorframe. She stumbled back, glaring at me with eyes rimmed in red. "You are going to fix this mess right now," Beatrice commanded, her voice shrill and echoing down the quiet hallway. "You are going to pick up your phone call off those federal agents, drop the eviction proceedings, and reinstate my son's access to his house immediately. You have had your little temper tantrum, and now it is time for you to clean up the disaster you created." I took a slow sip of my wine, looking down at her. "You are trespassing, Beatrice." "Do not you dare speak to me about laws!" Beatrice shrieked, pointing a shaking manicured finger at my chest. "Julian is currently in the emergency room. His blood pressure spiked to dangerous levels, and the doctors say his heart is literally failing. He is having a complete physical and mental breakdown because of the unbearable stress you intentionally inflicted on him. You have completely ruined an innocent, brilliant man, and you are going to reverse this before you kill him." I stared at her frantic, panicked face. For an entire decade, this woman had treated me like disposable hired help. She had openly ridiculed my clothes, my background, and my career. She had constantly reminded me that I was entirely unworthy of her prestigious family. Now she was standing in the hallway of my penthouse, begging me to save the son she had raised to be a manipulative monster. "Julian is exactly where he belongs," I stated, my voice flat and completely devoid of emotion. And his cardiovascular health is the absolute least of your concerns right now. Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. How can you be so utterly heartless? He is your husband. He is a federal criminal. Beatrice, I corrected her sharply. And I highly suggest you stop worrying about his heart rate and start worrying about your own survival. I reached over to the sleek entryway console table and picked up the thick, sealed manila envelope I had prepared earlier. I held it out toward her. You should really look at your son's portfolios. Beatrice, I said softly, pushing the envelope directly into her chest. She snatched the envelope from my hand, her eyes narrowing with intense suspicion. What nonsense is this? More of your fabricated accounting tricks. You think pieces of paper are going to intimidate me. She ripped the top of the envelope open and pulled out a dense stack of bank statements and wire transfer logs. I watched her eyes scan the highlighted lines of text. The arrogant anger in her face slowly began to morph into total, absolute confusion. I will explain it to you since Julian clearly lacked the courage to do so, I said, leaning comfortably against the doorframe. 3 months ago, Julian and Marcus aggressively shorted a massive block of tech stocks, trying to magically generate enough capital to cover up the bleeding revenue from Maya's fake wellness brand. The market rallied violently against them. They were hit with a catastrophic margin call from their offshore brokers. They needed liquid cash immediately, or their entire corporate structure would collapse and trigger an automatic audit. Beatrice flipped to the second page, her hands beginning to shake. The papers rustled loudly in the quiet hallway. These are my accounts, she whispered, her voice barely functioning as she stared at the highlighted balances. These are my private retirement portfolios. Julian had full power of attorney over your estate. Beatrice, I reminded her, watching the horrible realization dawn in her eyes. You gave it to him 5 years ago because you believed your golden boy was an infallible financial genius. When the margin calls hit, he did not ask for your permission. He completely liquidated your entire portfolio to save his own skin. He cashed out your pension, he drained your mutual funds, and he secretly leveraged a massive secondary mortgage against your ancestral home. That is impossible, she gasped, dropping several pages onto the floor. He would never do that to me. I am his mother. He loves me. He fed your entire life savings directly into the shredder to buy himself exactly 90 days of freedom, I stated mercilessly, watching her entire world crumble. Your accounts possess a balance of $0. The secondary mortgage is entirely in default. Your home is scheduled for bank foreclosure by the end of the month. Your precious golden boys did not just steal from their investors, Beatrice. They robbed you completely blind. You are entirely bankrupt. The remaining documents slipped right through Beatrice's trembling fingers, scattering like dead leaves across the polished floorboards. Her arrogant, superior facade shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The color drained completely from her face, leaving her looking gray and ancient. Her knees buckled beneath her weight. She collapsed heavily onto the hallway carpet, letting out a guttural, agonizing wail. She pressed her hands over her face, sobbing hysterically, as the reality of her total ruination finally destroyed her. Her precious, perfect son had happily sacrificed her entire future just to delay his own inevitable downfall. I stood in the doorway looking down at the weeping, broken matriarch who had made my life a living hell. I felt absolutely no pity. I took a deliberate step back into my beautiful, quiet sanctuary. I did not say another word. I simply reached out and pulled the heavy oak door completely shut, leaving her trapped in the hallway, alone with her tears and her bankruptcy. 2 weeks later, the lingering smell of Beatrice's expensive perfume had finally faded from my hallway. I sat perfectly still in a high-backed leather chair inside a sterile, heavily air-conditioned conference room at the federal family courthouse. My lead counsel, a ruthless and impeccably dressed woman named Evelyn, sat to my right, organizing a pristine stack of manila folders. To my left sat my forensic accounting team, ready to dismantle whatever legal fiction my soon-to-be ex-husband planned to present. The heavy wooden doors swung open and Julian swaggered into the room. Despite the fact that his startup was actively being dismantled by federal agencies and his mother was currently living in a budget motel, Julian still wore his custom Italian suits. He walked with an unearned, aggressive arrogance. He was accompanied by a sleazy, aggressive defense attorney named Sterling, a man notorious for burying opposing counsel in frivolous paperwork and shouting down witnesses. Julian took the seat directly across the mahogany table from me. He flashed me a chilling, predatory smirk. He looked exhausted, his skin sallow and his eyes underscored by dark, heavy bags, but his ego remained fully intact. He honestly believed he was walking into this deposition to deliver my execution. He believed he still held the ultimate trump card. The presiding judge, a stern, no-nonsense magistrate named Harrison, called the room to order. He instructed Sterling to present his opening arguments regarding the division of our marital assets. Sterling stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with a theatrical flourish. He paced the length of the table, projecting his voice to dominate the room. Your Honor, my client is the victim of a calculated, malicious campaign to seize his hard-earned assets. Sterling began pointing an accusing finger directly at me. Chloe Vance has engaged in hostile corporate takeovers and manipulated financial records. However, this entire proceeding is effectively moot. Prior to this unfortunate deterioration of their marriage, Chloe signed a legally binding ironclad post-nuptial agreement. Sterling paused, letting the silence stretch for maximum dramatic effect. Julian crossed his arms over his chest, leaning back in his chair. His smirk widened into a full-blown grin of absolute triumph. This agreement explicitly strips Chloe of any right to Julian's corporate holdings, his real estate, and his personal investment portfolios. Sterling continued, his voice echoing off the stark white walls. Furthermore, it grants Julian full executive control over Vanguard Enterprises and any other entities Chloe established during their marriage. She signed away her entire empire, Your Honor. We have the original execution copies right here. Sterling reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick blue legal binder. He slapped it onto the center of the table with a loud, resounding thud. Julian stared right into my eyes, silently mouthing the words, "You lose." I did not react. I simply turned my head and gave Evelyn a curt nod. Evelyn stood up, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. Your Honor, we request permission to examine the physical document opposing counsel is entering into evidence, she stated calmly. Judge Harrison waved his hand, granting permission. Sterling slid the heavy binder across the polished wood. Evelyn opened it slowly, flipping past the cover page. She turned to the second page, then the third, then the signature addendums. She did not say a word. She simply picked up the binder and handed it directly to the judge. I suggest Your Honor examines the stipulations for himself. Evelyn said, a sharp, dangerous edge creeping into her professional tone. Judge Harrison took the binder and adjusted his glasses. He stared down at the pages, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. He flipped back to the beginning. He turned the pages again, faster this time. He looked up at Sterling, his expression darkening into a scowl of sheer irritation. Mr. Sterling, I fail to see the humor in this presentation, Judge Harrison growled, tossing the binder back onto the table. There are no restrictive clauses in this document. There are no asset divisions. There are no signatures. Every single page of this supposed ironclad agreement is completely blank. Sterling froze. The smug, theatrical confidence vanished from his face in a millisecond. He snatched the binder off the table and ripped through the pages. Julian bolted upright out of his chair, leaning over his lawyer's shoulder. The pages were entirely empty. The pristine white paper held absolutely nothing. The specialized heat-sensitive disappearing ink I had used from my fountain pen the night he forced me to sign those documents had done exactly what it was engineered to do. It had vanished without leaving a single trace behind. This is impossible, Julian stammered, his voice rising in panic. I watched her sign it. I held the pen. She signed every single page in front of me. She altered the documents. She tampered with evidence. You presented the evidence, Mr. Sterling, Judge Harrison barked, slamming his hand on the desk. You brought a blank binder into my courtroom and attempted to claim it was a binding legal contract. Your Honor, opposing counsel is clearly confused, Evelyn interrupted, silencing Julian's frantic babbling. However, we do possess a fully executed, legally binding document that Julian willingly signed on that exact same evening. And this one is written in standard permanent blue ink. Evelyn reached into her own pristine folder and extracted a single crisp sheet of paper. She slid it smoothly across the mahogany table. It stopped directly in front of Julian. Julian stared down at the document. It was the specific piece of paper I had seamlessly slipped into the middle of his massive stack of corporate addendums during our tense dinner weeks ago. I had buried it beneath 30 pages of useless legalese, knowing he was far too arrogant and far too impatient to actually read what he was authorizing. "This, Your Honor, is a formalized confession of debt," Evelyn stated clearly, ensuring every word was recorded by the court stenographer. "It is a sworn affidavit signed by Julian, acknowledging that he personally diverted exactly $14 million from his Series A investor capital. Furthermore, it explicitly states that Julian accepts total personal financial liability for the missing funds, completely bypassing any corporate protections or limited liability shields." Julian's breathing stopped. He stared at his own unmistakable signature scrawled in bold blue ink at the bottom of the page. He realized in real time that he had not just signed a routine corporate addendum. He had signed a full, undisputed admission of federal financial fraud. He had legally attached the debt to his own name, destroying any chance of hiding behind his bankrupt startup. Sterling snatched the paper, reading the text. His hands began to shake. He slowly backed away from Julian as if his client had suddenly caught fire. "You set me up!" Julian roared, his voice tearing through the quiet courtroom. He violently shoved his chair backward, sending it crashing into the wall. He lunged toward his own lawyer, grabbing Sterling by the lapels of his expensive suit. "You told me the post-nup was airtight. You told me I was protected. You let her trick me into signing my own death warrant." Julian shook Sterling violently, spittle flying from his lips as he completely lost his grip on reality. "Bailiff, restrain him," Judge Harrison shouted, slamming his heavy wooden gavel down repeatedly. "Mr. Sterling, control your client. Julian, release him immediately, or I will have you remanded to federal holding. I find you in direct contempt of this court." Julian ignored the judge. He was blind with rage, his entire carefully constructed universe collapsing into absolute ruin. Two armed court bailiffs rushed forward, grabbing Julian by the shoulders and wrestling him forcefully away from his terrified attorney, pinning his arms behind his back. I watched with absolute detachment as the court bailiffs dragged a screaming, thrashing Julian out of the heavy double doors. His expensive custom loafers scrambled uselessly against the polished floorboards. I calmly gathered my files, placing them neatly into my leather briefcase. Evelyn gave me a rare, approving nod as we exited the courthouse. The financial guillotine had fallen perfectly. Later that evening, I walked alone through the subterranean parking garage of my penthouse building. The massive concrete expanse was bathed in cold, fluorescent light, and the air was thick with the smell of motor oil and damp pavement. The heels of my shoes echoed sharply in the cavernous space as I approached my private parking bay. I was 10 feet away from my car when a figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar directly into my path. It was Maya. I stopped in my tracks. The woman standing before me bore absolutely no resemblance to the arrogant, polished wellness guru who used to sneer at my wardrobe. Maya looked completely unhinged. Her designer trench coat was stained and misbuttoned. Her perfectly styled hair was matted to one side of her face, and her hands were trembling violently. She clutched a heavy metal tire iron in her right hand, her knuckles white from the strain. Her eyes were wild and darted around the empty garage with feral desperation. "You destroyed my life!" Maya screamed, her voice cracking as it bounced off the concrete walls. "You took everything from me, Chloe." I did not take a single step backward. I kept my posture perfectly straight and my expression completely blank. I slowly reached up and tapped the face of my digital smartwatch. "Your life was a federal crime, Maya," I stated calmly. I simply handed the authorities the receipt. Maya took a menacing step forward, raising the metal bar. "My accounts are frozen!" She shrieked, tears of rage spilling down her cheeks. My boutique was raided by the IRS this morning. They seized my inventory, my computers, my customer lists. Every single one of my friends has blocked my number. The country club revoked my membership before noon. My husband is on the run, and my brother is sitting in a jail cell because of you. You did this to yourself, I replied, my voice echoing coldly in the empty space. You chose to sign fraudulent tax returns. You chose to wash dirty money through your phony essential oils and overpriced yoga mats. You are just a jealous, pathetic, ugly woman, Maya spat, pointing the heavy iron bar directly at my face. You could never stand the fact that we were better than you. You could never handle seeing a successful, affluent black family building generational wealth while you were just a basic, boring little clerk. You ruined us out of pure, malicious spite because you knew you would never belong in our world. You wanted to tear down our empire because you were too mediocre to build your own. I let her finish her desperate, delusional rant. I watched her chest heave as she struggled to pull air into her lungs. I did not flinch at her insults or her threatening posture. I simply looked at her with absolute, unfiltered disgust. You never had an empire, Maya, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. You had a slaughterhouse. Maya blinked, her manic energy faltering for a fraction of a second. What are you talking about? She demanded, gripping the weapon tighter. I am talking about where Marcus actually got the seed money to fund your pathetic little vanity project, I explained, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. Victoria sang like a bird this morning, Maya. She handed me the offshore routing numbers. Marcus did not just embezzle venture capital from Julian's tech startup. He preyed on his own people. Maya froze, her eyes widening. He went to the local community centers. I continued, ruthlessly exposing the horrific truth. He held investment seminars for retired teachers, nurses, and postal workers. He convinced dozens of elderly people in his own community to hand over their entire life savings. He drained their pensions. He liquidated their modest retirement portfolios. He took the money those grandmothers and grandfathers had saved for 40 years, and he pumped it directly into your wellness brand to cover your operating losses. You built your luxury lifestyle by stealing the food straight out of the mouths of your own community's elders. Maya shook her head rapidly, stepping backward, as if my words were physically striking her. No, she whispered, her voice trembling. No, Marcus would never do that. He is a legitimate financial director. You are lying. You are making this up to mess with my head. I have the bank transfers, Maya, I stated mercilessly. I handed them directly to the federal prosecutors 3 hours ago. You drank $100 green juices and wore $1,000 leggings paid for by stolen pension funds. You didn't build an empire, Maya. You built a parasite. I just turned on the lights. A primal scream tore from Maya's throat. Her delusion finally shattered, leaving nothing behind but pure, violent rage. She raised the heavy metal tire iron above her head and lunged directly at me, swinging the weapon with deadly intent. I did not move a muscle. At that exact second, the deafening wail of emergency sirens erupted through the subterranean garage. The harsh screech of heavy tires echoed against the concrete as 3 black federal SUVs tore down the entrance ramp, blocking the exit completely. Flashing red and blue lights instantly bathed the dark walls in a frantic, violent strobe. Maya froze mid-swing, the heavy iron bar suspended in the air. She whipped her head around, staring in absolute terror at the swarm of armed federal agents and local police officers pouring out of the vehicles. Drop the weapon and put your hands on your head, a tactical officer bellowed, raising his weapon and aiming it squarely at Maya's chest. Do it now. Maya dropped the tire iron. It hit the concrete floor with a loud metallic clang. She slowly sank to her knees, her hands trembling as she placed them over her head. 2 officers rushed forward, grabbing her arms and roughly forcing them behind her back. The harsh, ratcheting sound of metal handcuffs echoed through the garage. I looked down at my wrist, letting my sleeve fall back over my smartwatch. I had pressed the silent emergency panic button the exact moment Maya had stepped out from behind the concrete pillar. I knew the federal task force assigned to the Vanguard case was monitoring my location continuously. Maya looked up at me from the cold concrete floor, her eyes wide with total defeat as the officers hauled her to her feet. Maya Vance, an IRS special agent, stated, stepping forward with a clipboard. You are under arrest for federal tax evasion, wire fraud, and money laundering. We are also adding a charge of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it. I stood perfectly still and watched as they shoved the screaming, sobbing wellness guru into the back of a heavily armored squad car. The heavy metal door slammed shut, trapping her inside. I stepped over the discarded tire iron, walked to my car, and drove away without ever looking back. While Maya was being processed in a federal holding cell, Julian and Marcus were currently squatting in the suffocating pitch-black darkness of Julian's foreclosed suburban mansion. The bank had cut the power 2 days prior. The grand crystal chandeliers were dead, and the heavy mahogany furniture was covered in deep, impenetrable shadows. They sat on the floor of the empty living room, surrounded by stale takeout containers and the sheer panic of their collapsing empire. Suddenly, the blinding glare of high-beam headlights shattered the darkness, piercing through the grand bay windows. Heavy boots crunched violently against the gravel driveway. Before Marcus could even stand up, the custom oak front doors were kicked open, splintering the wood completely from the frame. 4 men stepped into the foyer. They were not federal agents. They were the shadow investors. These were the ruthless, off-the-books financiers who had provided the initial $5 million for Julian's tech startup. They operated entirely outside the law, and they did not care about SEC audits or federal mandates. They only cared about their return on investment. The lead investor, a massive, terrifying man named Silas, walked directly into the living room. He did not yell. He simply pulled a heavy, suppressed handgun from his jacket and placed it gently on the glass coffee table. The soft, metallic clink echoed like a bomb in the silent house. You have exactly until midnight to return our $5 million, Silas stated, his voice a low, lethal rumble. We know the corporate accounts are frozen. We know your offshore shells are empty. We do not care how you get the liquidity, but if that money is not wired into our accounts by midnight, you two will never see the sunrise. Julian backed away, his spine hitting the wall. He was trembling violently, completely reverting to the cowardly little boy he had always been. Marcus stood frozen, staring at the weapon on the table. It is Chloe! Julian screamed, pointing a shaking finger toward the city skyline. My wife stole it. She orchestrated the freeze. She transferred the liquid assets into her own holding company, Vanguard Enterprises. She has the $5 million. I can give you her corporate address right now. She is working late. She has the funds, Silas. I swear to God she has your money. Julian practically begged, throwing me to the wolves without a single second of hesitation to save his own pathetic life. He frantically scribbled my private office address on a torn piece of paper and shoved it into Silas's hand. Silas looked at the paper, then looked back at Julian with cold, dead eyes. He picked up his weapon and turned toward the door. The 4 men filed out, leaving Julian and Marcus hyperventilating in the dark. 45 minutes later, the private elevator leading directly to my top-floor corporate suite chimed. I was sitting behind my sleek marble desk reviewing the final liquidation reports for Maya's ruined boutique. The heavy glass doors to my office swung open and Silas walked in, flanked by his 3 enforcers. They bypassed the lobby security completely. They spread out across the room, intentionally blocking the exits and looming over my desk. Their physical intimidation tactics were designed to induce sheer blind panic. I did not flinch. I did not reach for my phone. I simply closed my laptop and looked up at Silas with absolute, unbothered calm. Your husband sent us, Silas growled, stepping right up to the edge of my desk. He claims you are holding $5 million of our investment capital. He says you froze the accounts. We are not leaving this building until that money is transferred back to us. I looked at the 4 massive men standing in my office. Julian's absolute cowardice was genuinely predictable. He had sent violent criminals to my doorstep, hoping they would do the dirty work he was too terrified to do himself. You are asking the wrong questions, Silas, I said, leaning back comfortably in my leather chair. But since you took the time to visit me, I suggest we step into the boardroom. I have something you desperately need to see. Silas narrowed his eyes, highly suspicious of my total lack of fear. He gestured for his men to follow as I stood up and walked gracefully into the adjacent glass-walled boardroom. I took a seat at the head of the long, polished steel table. Silas sat directly to my right, his enforcers standing like statues behind him. He fully expected me to open a laptop and initiate a wire transfer. He expected bearer bonds or a crypto ledger. He expected the $5 million. I reached under the table and pulled up a sleek silver aluminum briefcase. I placed it squarely on the center of the table and unlatched the heavy metal clasps. The lock snapped open with a sharp, echoing click. I spun the briefcase around and pushed it directly toward Silas. He looked down, expecting stacks of high-denomination bills. Instead, he found a dense, meticulously organized stack of printed documents, highlighted financial records, and flight itineraries. Silas frowned, picking up the top page. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice rising in anger. "That is your future," I stated, my voice perfectly level. "Julian and Marcus did not lose your $5 million in a bad marketplace, Silas. They never intended to invest it in the first place. You are looking at the verified wire transfer logs from 3 weeks ago. They slowly funneled your entire investment out of the corporate accounts and routed it through Maya's wellness brand directly into a private, untraceable offshore account in Dubai." Silas's jaw tightened as his eyes scanned the highlighted routing numbers. The sheer, undeniable proof was right in front of him. "Now look at the second folder," I instructed, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the table. Silas pulled out a stack of internal corporate emails and federal filing documents. His face drained of color as he read the forged signatures and the heavily doctored board resolutions. "Julian and Marcus knew the federal authorities were closing in," I explained mercilessly. "They knew the SEC was about to execute a massive raid on their operations, so they needed a scapegoat. They forged those documents to legally attach your name and your associates' names to the most egregious securities violations. They explicitly listed you as the primary shadow directors of the fraudulent shell companies." Silas's breathing grew heavy. The realization was hitting him like a freight train. "They booked one-way, first-class tickets to Dubai for tonight at 2 in the morning. I continued tapping the flight manifests at the bottom of the briefcase. "They were going to take your $5 million, flee the country, and leave you and your men holding the bag for massive federal fraud charges. You were going to take the fall, Silas. You were going to federal prison while they lived like kings in the desert. I didn't steal your money. I just turned on the lights before they could escape in the dark." Silas stared at the flight itineraries with Julian and Marcus's names printed clearly across the top. The anger in his eyes shifted entirely. It was no longer directed at me. It was a cold, burning, homicidal rage directed entirely at the two cowards squatting in the dark, foreclosed mansion across town. He slowly closed the briefcase, his knuckles white as he gripped the handle. He looked at me with a terrifying, deadly realization. He had been played by two arrogant fools, and he was ready to collect his debt. Silas did not say a single word for what felt like an eternity. He simply stared at the closed aluminum briefcase. The heavy silence in the boardroom was thick enough to suffocate a lesser person. When he finally spoke, his voice was completely devoid of its earlier aggression, replaced instead by a chilling, mechanical coldness. "They were going to frame us," Silas stated, looking directly into my eyes. "They were going to take our capital and leave us holding the bag for a federal indictment." "That was exactly their plan," I confirmed, leaning back in my chair. "Julian is arrogant, but he is also a coward." When the margin calls hit, and the SEC started sniffing around his offshore accounts, he panicked. He needed a way out, and your $5 million was his golden ticket. He sent you here tonight, hoping I would be intimidated into handing over the cash, or better yet, hoping you would eliminate his wife and his primary obstacle in one convenient sweep. One of the enforcers standing behind Silas cracked his knuckles, a loud, sharp popping sound in the quiet room. "Give us the word, boss," the man growled. "We can be at that foreclosed mansion in 20 minutes. We will tear them apart piece by piece." "No," I interjected, my voice slicing through the rising violence. "If you touch a single hair on Julian or Marcus's heads, you will spend the rest of your lives in federal prison. The FBI is already watching them. The SEC is actively auditing their shell companies. If you go after them with baseball bats and handguns, you will simply hand the federal prosecutors the exact violent criminal syndicate they are looking for. You will finish the job Julian started. You will frame yourselves. Silas held up a massive hand, silencing his men. He looked at me with a new level of respect. The brute force intimidation had vanished completely. He was now looking at me as a peer, a fellow apex predator who had successfully outmaneuvered him. "So what is your play, Chloe?" Silas asked, leaning forward and resting his massive forearms on the polished steel table. "You did not invite us into your boardroom just to give us a warning. You have a solution." "I have a transaction," I corrected him. "Right now you are holding $5 million in completely worthless toxic equity. Julian's startup is functionally bankrupt and legally radioactive. If you hold on to those shares, you will be investigated as co-conspirators in a massive securities fraud scheme. I am offering you a clean, immediate exit." I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a secondary file, setting it next to the aluminum briefcase. "I will personally buy out your entire majority stake in Julian's startup," I stated plainly. "I will purchase your shares for exactly 10 cents on the dollar." Silas scoffed, his eyes narrowing. "You want us to take a $4.5 million loss?" "You have already lost the $5 million, Silas," I reminded him mercilessly. "Julian and Marcus burned it. My offer gives you a completely legal, heavily documented corporate tax write-off. You can use this strategic loss to offset the capital gains on your other legitimate enterprises. You walk away with clean hands, a clean ledger, and absolutely no federal exposure." "But there is a catch." "There always is," Silas muttered, crossing his arms. "What do you want?" "I want your complete, undisputed cooperation," I demanded. "I want you to turn over every single email, text message, and voice recording you have of Julian and Marcus soliciting your funds. You will hand this evidence directly over to my lead counsel, Evelyn, and you will cooperate fully with the federal authorities when they ask for your testimony. You give me the weapon to bury them permanently, and I give you the exit strategy that saves your freedom." Silas stared at me. He weighed the options in his head, processing the flawless, brutal logic of my proposal. He realized instantly that I had mapped out every single variable of this corporate war. I was not just a disgruntled wife seeking petty revenge. I was a financial mastermind who had orchestrated a perfect, flawless checkmate. He let out a low, rumbling laugh, a sound of genuine, absolute admiration. "Julian really thought you were just a stupid, basic housewife." Silas chuckled, shaking his head in disbelief. "He is the biggest fool on the planet. He married a shark and he thought he was swimming with a goldfish." Silas reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy gold-plated fountain pen. He opened the file I had provided. Without another word of hesitation, he signed his name across the transfer documents, legally relinquishing his entire majority stake in the startup. His enforcers, acting as witnesses, signed the addendums. Within 60 seconds, the transaction was complete. I was now the absolute, undisputed majority owner of Julian's entire corporate empire. I owned the patents. I owned the servers. I owned the very ground his company was built on. Silas stood up, buttoning his jacket. "My men will deliver the communication logs to your lawyer by tomorrow morning," he promised. "Give Julian my regards before you destroy him." "I will," I replied, standing up and offering my hand. Silas shook it firmly, a silent pact between two predators. He turned and led his men out of the boardroom, leaving me standing alone in the quiet, immaculate space. I walked back to my office and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the glittering city lights. The feeling of total, absolute control was intoxicating. Suddenly, the harsh ringing of my private desk line shattered the silence. I walked over and glanced at the caller ID. It was Julian. I tapped the speakerphone button and let the line open. "Chloe." Julian's voice came through the speaker, frantic, breathless, and trembling with sheer, unfiltered panic. "Chloe, please tell me you are there. Please tell me you are alive." He had clearly realized that Silas and his men had not returned to the foreclosed mansion. He had realized that his violent distraction had failed, and that he was now completely out of options. "I am right here, Julian," I answered, my voice smooth and perfectly calm. "Listen to me. We need to stop this." Julian begged, his words tumbling over each other in desperate haste. "This has gone too far. The feds raided Maya's boutique. Silas is out for blood. We are both going to end up dead or in prison. I am calling a truce, Chloe. I will call off Sterling. I will drop the hostile divorce proceedings. We can settle this quietly. Just give me the company back. Transfer the assets back to my name, and I swear I will walk away peacefully." I picked up my glass of water and took a slow, deliberate sip. I looked down at the signed transfer documents resting on my desk. I owned every single piece of his life. He was begging for scraps from the empire he thought he had built. A soft, genuine laugh escaped my lips. It echoed brightly in the quiet office. "Why would I give you a company that I am legally dismantling tomorrow morning?" The next morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, the emergency board meeting commenced in the sleek, glass-walled conference room of Julian's tech startup. The atmosphere inside the room was thick with anxiety. The remaining minority shareholders and executive officers sat rigidly in their ergonomic chairs, murmuring in hushed, panicked tones about frozen accounts and federal inquiries. Julian and Marcus stumbled through the heavy double doors, looking completely ravaged. Julian wore the exact same wrinkled custom suit from the disastrous deposition the day before. Marcus had dark, hollow circles under his bloodshot eyes, and his expensive silk tie was hanging loosely around his unbuttoned collar. They had clearly spent the entire night panicking in the dark, foreclosed mansion, waiting for an executioner that never arrived. Despite their severe physical deterioration, they walked to the head of the table projecting a desperate, forced confidence. They honestly believed this was simply a crisis management meeting. They thought they could soothe the frightened board members with empty promises and corporate doublespeak. I walked into the boardroom at 8:02. I wore a sharply tailored crimson power suit and carried the sleek silver aluminum briefcase. The entire room fell completely silent. Julian stood up, his face flushing a deep, angry red. He demanded to know who let me pass the lobby security and ordered me to leave his building immediately. I did not answer him. I walked directly past his chair, ignoring his outstretched arm, and sat firmly at the head of the mahogany table. I took the seat exclusively reserved for the chief executive officer. Julian slammed his hands on the table, shouting for building security. I calmly unlatched the briefcase and slid the legally binding transfer documents across the polished wood. "I am not leaving, Julian," I stated, my voice commanding the absolute attention of every single person in the room. "As of last night, I successfully bought out Silas and the shadow investors. I hold exactly 78% of this company's voting shares. I am the absolute, undisputed majority owner, and I am calling this emergency session to order." A collective gasp rippled through the boardroom. The executives stared at the transfer documents with wide eyes. Marcus scoffed, leaning forward and resting his elbows aggressively on the table. He attempted to deploy his usual arrogant corporate jargon to regain control of the narrative. He claimed I lacked the executive synergy to understand their complex liquidity pivots, and that my hostile takeover would trigger an automatic devaluation of their core assets. He tried to convince the board that my actions were an emotional overreaction from a bitter wife. I let him ramble for exactly 30 seconds before shutting him down completely. "Your core assets are entirely fictitious, Marcus," I stated sharply, sliding a forensic audit report down the table directly into his chest. "You artificially inflated your user acquisition numbers by 300% using ghost servers. You funneled legitimate Series A capital into Maya's fraudulent wellness brand to cover your massive personal gambling debts. You do not have liquidity pivots, Marcus. You have multiple counts of federal wire fraud and blatant embezzlement." I looked him dead in the eyes, my expression absolute ice. "You did not build an empire, Marcus. You built a parasite. I just turned on the lights. You are terminated effectively immediately. Security will escort you out of the building the second this meeting adjourns." Marcus opened his mouth to argue, but the hard, undeniable physical evidence sitting in front of the board silenced him completely. The other executives began flipping through the audit reports, their faces registering pure horror as they saw the sheer magnitude of the theft. Julian finally realized the absolute finality of his situation. His arrogant facade instantly evaporated. His knees buckled, and he collapsed back into his leather chair. He buried his face in his trembling hands and began to sob loudly right in front of his esteemed colleagues. He begged me to reconsider crying about our wedding vows and the life we had built together. He pointed a shaking finger at his brother, claiming he was manipulated and coerced into the financial schemes. He pleaded for my mercy, promising he would change and go to counseling if I just gave him one more chance to run the company. I watched my husband weep with absolute emotional detachment. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and connected it via Bluetooth to the boardroom's high-fidelity surround sound system. "You were not manipulated, Julian," I said coldly. "You were a willing participant in a coordinated scheme to destroy my life." I pressed play on this audio file I had secretly captured on the commuter train weeks ago. The crystal-clear voices of Maya and Marcus echoed through the silent boardroom. The board members listened in utter shock as Maya's recorded voice laughed cruelly about draining my personal credit completely dry. They heard Marcus detailing exactly how they would toss me aside like disposable garbage the second the offshore accounts were fully funded. They heard the raw, malicious premeditation of a family eager to ruin a woman they viewed as entirely inferior. Julian stopped crying. The blood drained entirely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. The remaining board members stared at him with unfiltered, absolute disgust. He had nothing left to say. No excuses, no manipulative lies. The audio recording had stripped away every single layer of his deceit, leaving the ugly truth completely exposed. I disconnected my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. "I promised you a reckoning, Julian," I whispered into the deafening silence of the room. Before Julian could formulate a single pathetic response, the heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung open with tremendous force. It was not building security coming to escort Marcus out. It was a team of 6 heavily armed federal agents wearing dark tactical jackets bearing the letters FBI in bold yellow text. They fanned out across the room, completely surrounding the mahogany table. They were not here to conduct an SEC audit or review financial ledgers. The trap had finally snapped completely shut. The lead agent pulled a stack of legal paperwork from his jacket pocket and stepped directly up to Julian and Marcus. Julian Vance and Marcus Vance, the agent, announced, his voice booming with absolute unyielding authority. "We hold active federal warrants for your arrest. Marcus Vance, you are being charged with multiple counts of aggravated wire fraud, massive corporate embezzlement, and the systemic targeted defrauding of elderly pensioners." The lead agent recited the charges with a practiced icy precision. His hand rested heavily on his utility belt. Marcus did not accept his fate. His arrogant brain misfired completely under the crushing weight of reality. He looked wildly around the boardroom, his eyes darting from the armed federal agents to the terrified executives pressing themselves against the glass walls. He calculated his odds and made the worst possible decision. He lunged for the side exit. He did not even make it 3 steps. 2 tactical agents closed the distance instantly. One agent grabbed Marcus by the collar of his expensive silk shirt, spinning him around with brutal force. The other agent swept his legs. Marcus hit the polished mahogany boardroom table hard, shattering a glass water pitcher before crashing violently to the floor. The sound of his breath leaving his lungs echoed sharply. An agent drove a heavy knee directly into the center of his spine, pinning him flat against the carpet. The harsh metallic ratcheting of steel handcuffs snapping tightly around his wrists signaled the absolute end of his corporate career. "Get off me!" Marcus screamed. His face pressed into the broken glass, his voice cracking with humiliated panic. "I am the chief financial officer. You cannot do this to me. You are a federal inmate." The agent replied coldly, hauling Marcus up by his chained arms. Julian watched his brother get violently subdued. The last remaining shred of his false bravado evaporated. He backed away from the table, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. His eyes darted frantically around the room until they locked onto me. He pivoted to pure survival mode, instantly willing to throw his own flesh and blood into the fire to save his own skin. "Chloe, please, you have to tell them." Julian begged, his voice a high-pitched, desperate whine. "You have to tell them, I did not know anything about this. It was all Marcus. Marcus and Maya set up the offshore accounts. They stole the pension funds. I am just the ideas guy, Chloe. I just handle the venture capital pitching. I never signed off on stealing from the elderly. You know me, Chloe. Tell them I am innocent." He fell to his knees right in front of the remaining board members, completely degrading himself. He crawled slightly forward, his expensive suit ruined his tear-streaked face, looking up at me with pathetic, pleading eyes. I looked down at the man I had once vowed to spend my life with. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no residual affection. Just the cold, satisfying realization of total victory. I slowly reached into the inner pocket of my tailored crimson blazer and pulled out a sleek silver flash drive. I held it up, letting it catch the harsh fluorescent light of the boardroom before handing it directly to the lead FBI agent. "He is lying," I stated, my voice carrying cleanly across the silent room. "That drive contains every single deleted email, encrypted text message, and offshore routing approval Julian Vance personally authorized over the last 4 years. It includes his direct written orders to Marcus, instructing him to explicitly target retired teachers and nurses because they were easier to manipulate. He did not just know about the scheme. He was the primary architect of the entire operation." The lead agent took the flash drive and slipped it into an evidence bag. He gave me a curt, professional nod of appreciation before turning his attention back to my husband. "Julian Vance, you are under arrest," the agent stated, signaling for his men to move in. Julian tried to scramble backward, but 2 agents grabbed him by the arms, lifting him forcefully from his knees and slamming him face first against the glass wall of the boardroom. The entire pane of glass shuddered under the impact. They wrenched his arms painfully behind his back and secured the handcuffs. Julian pressed his cheek against the cold glass, breathing heavily. He slowly turned his head to look at me. The pathetic begging was gone, replaced by a look of sheer, bewildered betrayal. His tiny ego simply could not comprehend how he had been outsmarted so completely. "You were supposed to be the quiet, obedient wife," Julian spat, his voice trembling with venom and disbelief. I stood up from the executive chair, smoothing the front of my crimson jacket. I walked slowly around the mahogany table until I was standing just inches away from him. I leaned in close, making sure my words were the very last thing he heard before losing his freedom forever. "And you were supposed to be smart enough not to hand a forensic accountant your unlocked phone," I whispered coldly. Julian gasped, his eyes widening in absolute horror as the realization finally struck him. He remembered the dozens of times he had carelessly tossed me his phone, asking me to fix a calendar sync issue or clear his flooded inbox while he watched television. He had handed me the keys to his destruction willingly because he was too arrogant to believe I possessed the intellect to look beneath the surface. "Get them out of my building," I ordered, turning my back on him completely. The agents hauled Julian and Marcus through the shattered boardroom doors, dragging them past the terrified executives and out toward the waiting elevators. Their panicked shouts faded into the distance, leaving me standing alone in the center of the empire I had just legally conquered. Across the city, in a dilapidated industrial district, the neon sign of a cheap roadside motel flickered erratically. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap bleach. The faded floral wallpaper was peeling at the corners, and the worn mattress sagged heavily in the middle. Beatrice sat frozen on the edge of the bed. Her bank accounts had been frozen by federal mandate that morning. Her country club membership had been revoked before lunch. The sprawling luxury estate she had lived in for a decade was currently surrounded by yellow crime scene tape. She stared blankly at a small staticky television mounted on the scuffed dresser. The local news channel had interrupted its regular broadcasting for a breaking live report. The screen displayed aerial helicopter footage hovering directly over Vanguard Enterprises headquarters. Beatrice clutched her chest, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging into her cheap polyester blouse. She watched in breathless, suffocating horror as the ground cameras zoomed in on the front entrance of the high-rise. The heavy glass doors slid open and a swarm of federal agents marched out into the flashing red and blue lights of waiting squad cars. And there they were. Julian and Marcus, her perfect golden boys. The brilliant, successful sons she had spent her entire life placing on an untouchable pedestal. They were frog-marched down the concrete steps, their heads shoved forcefully down to protect them from the camera flashes. They were shoved into the back of heavily armored federal transport vehicles looking like common street criminals. Beatrice let out a low, agonizing wail that echoed off the cheap motel walls. Her entire dynasty, her legacy of arrogance and unchecked greed, was collapsing in real time on live television, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop it. The trap had snapped completely shut. 3 months later, the heavy oak doors of the federal family courthouse sealed shut behind me. The air inside the courtroom was crisp and smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. I sat perfectly straight in my high-backed leather chair next to my lead counsel, Evelyn. Directly across the wide aisle, the respondents' table sat completely and utterly empty. Julian was not permitted to attend the hearing in person. He was currently broadcasting live via a secure video link from a federal holding facility in upstate New York. The massive flat-screen monitor mounted on the courtroom wall displayed a man who bore absolutely zero resemblance to the arrogant tech CEO I had once married. Julian was swimming in an oversized, cheap neon orange jumpsuit. His perfectly styled hair had been shaved close to his scalp, and his posture was completely hollowed out. The deep, dark purple bags under his eyes spoke of countless sleepless nights locked inside a 6-by-8-foot concrete cell. The presiding judge, a formidable woman with an absolute no-nonsense reputation, adjusted her glasses and stared at the monitor with unfiltered disgust. Julian was currently facing a mandatory minimum of 15 years in federal prison for aggravated wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and the systematic targeted defrauding of elderly pensioners. He also owed over $9 million in federal restitution. Mr. Vance, in my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a case of such egregious financial abuse and calculated marital betrayal, the judge stated, her voice echoing sharply across the silent room. You utilized your wife's exceptional credit and pristine financial standing as a shield while actively plotting to ruin her personal and professional life. You operated as a parasite. The judge slammed her wooden gavel down with a resounding crack. Because of your massive federal liabilities and your highly documented attempts to illegally funnel marital assets offshore, I am awarding the petitioner 100% of her requested settlement. I was legally granted absolute ownership of Vanguard Enterprises. I retained the penthouse, the massive investment portfolios, and every single asset I had built. Furthermore, the judge slapped Julian with severe punitive damages, effectively ensuring that if he ever managed to earn a single legitimate dollar after his eventual release from prison, it would be immediately garnished and transferred directly into my accounts. Julian opened his mouth, his face contorting in sheer panic. He leaned toward the camera, raising his handcuffed wrists to beg for leniency. He wanted to plead his case, to negotiate, to use his old charming manipulation tactics. The judge simply pressed a glowing red button on her console and muted his microphone entirely. We watched in absolute silence as his mouth moved in desperate, frantic pleas. He shouted and thrashed against his restraints, but the courtroom heard nothing. His legal and financial existence was completely, permanently erased with the push of a single button. As we waited for the clerk to finalize the paperwork, my mind briefly drifted to Victoria. The arrogant mistress had genuinely thought she could outsmart the justice system. After she sang to the authorities and handed over the offshore routing numbers to save herself from federal indictment, she had the absolute sheer audacity to file a civil lawsuit against me. She tried to sue me for severe emotional distress and the massive loss of her prospective income, claiming my actions had irreparably damaged her reputation and ruined her lifestyle. Evelyn and I did not just file a motion to dismiss her ridiculous claim. We immediately counter-sued her for the rapid return of every single stolen dollar she had received from Julian and Marcus. We brought in a team of forensic accountants to trace the fraudulent funds directly to her luxury vehicles, her extensive designer wardrobe, and her expensive leased apartment. The courts froze her remaining accounts within 48 hours. Victoria was entirely liquidated. The bank repossessed her bright red sports car right out of her driveway. The landlord evicted her from her luxury high-rise building. Every single designer bag and expensive piece of jewelry was seized by the state to satisfy the countersuit. I had received a detailed private investigation report just yesterday outlining her current employment status. The polished, arrogant woman who used to drink expensive vintage champagne on my dime was now working the drive-through window at a greasy fast food chain on the industrial outskirts of the city. She was spending 40 hours a week wearing a cheap, poorly fitted polyester uniform that constantly smelled of old frying oil, forced to force a smile at impatient customers, just to afford her rent in a tiny, cramped studio apartment. It was the exact miserable reality she deserved. The judge signed the final decree with a sharp, definitive stroke of her pen. I was officially divorced. I was finally completely free. I shook Evelyn's hand, and we walked out of the courtroom together. We pushed through the heavy brass doors of the courthouse and stepped out into the bright, blinding afternoon sunlight. The wide granite steps were crowded with local reporters eager to get a statement regarding the high-profile Vance syndicate collapse. I kept my expression perfectly neutral, adjusting my designer sunglasses as Evelyn expertly guided me through the aggressive throng of journalists toward my waiting black town car. We were just 10 feet away from the vehicle when a sudden violent commotion erupted at the edge of the crowd. Someone shoved violently past two armed security guards, knocking a reporter's heavy camera directly to the pavement. A figure lunged out of the chaotic mass of people sprinting directly into my path. It was Maya. She was currently out on federal bail, desperately awaiting her own criminal trial. She looked completely feral and dangerously unhinged. Her signature polished wellness guru aesthetic was completely destroyed. She wore baggy sweatpants and a stained, oversized jacket. Her hair was matted to her skull, and her eyes were wide with a manic, bloodshot rage. She looked like a cornered, desperate animal with absolutely nothing left to lose. "You ruined me!" Maya shrieked, her voice a raw, guttural scream that echoed off the tall stone pillars of the courthouse. She lunged forward, closing the distance between us in a fraction of a second. In her right hand, she gripped a massive, steaming cardboard cup. She ripped the plastic lid off, exposing boiling, scalding hot coffee. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, malicious hatred as she reared her arm violently backward, preparing to hurl the boiling liquid directly into my face. I did not flinch. I did not scream or raise my hands in a defensive panic. I had spent the last several months anticipating every single predictable move these arrogant amateurs would make, and Maya was no exception. As her arm snapped forward, releasing the deadly arc of boiling coffee, I simply pivoted on my right heel. I shifted my weight with effortless precision, stepping smoothly to the side in one fluid motion. The scalding brown liquid sailed harmlessly past my shoulder, splattering violently against the hard granite steps behind me. Maya, completely blinded by her own feral rage and entirely off balance from the fierce force of her throw, could not stop her forward momentum. Her heavy sneakers caught the edge of the polished stone lip, bordering the massive courthouse courtyard fountain. Her arms flailed wildly in the empty air as gravity pulled her forcefully forward. She pitched over the edge with a loud shrieking gasp and crashed face first into the icy decorative pool. The impact sent a massive, violent wave of chlorinated water crashing over the stone perimeter. The timing could not have been more perfectly poetic. The dozen local news crews and aggressive photographers who had gathered to capture my exit instantly pivoted their heavy shoulder-mounted cameras. Bright white flashbulbs erupted in a blinding, chaotic strobe effect. Live broadcasters immediately began narrating the pathetic spectacle into their microphones as their cameramen zoomed in closely on the disgraced former wellness guru, floundering desperately in the shallow municipal fountain. Maya gasped loudly, breaking the surface of the freezing water. Her baggy stained sweatpants and oversized jacket instantly absorbed gallons of the dirty fountain water, dragging her down heavily against the slick tile bottom. She sputtered and coughed, wiping soggy, matted hair and stray copper pennies from her eyes. She sat up in the center of the fountain, looking like a drowned rat, her chest heaving with humiliating, uncontrolled sobs. She began screaming incoherent, desperate obscenities at me, her voice cracking under the intense, crushing weight of her total public ruin. I walked slowly to the stone edge of the fountain. The news cameras framed us perfectly, the brilliant, victorious executive standing tall over the ruined, sobbing fraud. I looked down at her shivering, pathetic form. My expression remained entirely neutral, projecting absolute, unyielding authority. "You wanted to know what real wealth looks like, Maya," I stated, my voice cutting cleanly through the noise of the flashing cameras and her hysterical sobbing. "It is not designer bags or stolen loans. It is knowing nobody can ever take your power away." I did not wait for her to formulate a pathetic, watery response. I simply turned my back on her and walked away with absolute grace. Evelyn was already holding the heavy door of the sleek black town car open for me. I slid into the plush leather interior, the thick tinted windows instantly separating me from the chaotic circus outside. The engine hummed quietly and the driver pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving Maya shivering to the merciless local press. Over the next several weeks, the justice system meticulously dismantled the remaining fragments of the Vance legacy. Julian and Marcus stood together in a sterile federal courtroom, completely stripped of their custom Italian suits and arrogant posturing. The federal judge showed absolutely no mercy during their sentencing hearing. He cited their profound lack of remorse and the sheer magnitude of their financial crimes against vulnerable retirees. They were both handed 10 solid years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without any possibility of early parole. The last image the public saw of the Vance brothers was them being loaded onto a heavily barred prison transport bus, wearing matching scratchy prison-issued jumpsuits, their wrists and ankles chained heavily together. Beatrice faced a uniquely humiliating reckoning. With her assets completely frozen and her luxury estate seized by federal authorities to pay back the stolen pension funds, she was forced to enter the working class she had viciously despised her entire life. Without any marketable skills or a college degree, her options were severely limited. She now spends her days wearing a bright blue, heavily starched polyester vest. She stands near the sliding glass automatic doors of a massive, loud discount retail store, handing out sanitized shopping carts to bargain hunters. Her feet swell painfully in cheap orthopedic sneakers as she forces a tight, painful smile at the very same middle-class shoppers she used to treat like disposable garbage. Maya, desperate to avoid sharing a cell block with hardened criminals, struck a last-minute plea deal. In exchange for avoiding a lengthy prison sentence, she was ordered to complete 500 hours of grueling manual community service. She now wears a highly visible, bright neon orange safety vest over her cheap clothes. She walks slowly down the exact same busy downtown luxury avenues where she used to strut in her stolen designer heels, carrying a long metal trash grabber and a heavy black plastic garbage bag. She spends her days picking up discarded fast food wrappers and wet cigarette butts while city buses drive by, splashing dirty street puddles near her ankles. I sat quietly in the center of my pristine, sunlit penthouse office. The massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows offered an unobstructed, breathtaking view of the sprawling city skyline below. The air in the room was cool and smelled of fresh lilies and expensive leather. Everything in this immaculate space belonged entirely to me. On the corner of my sleek, minimalist glass desk sat a small, dark velvet box. I reached over and popped the lid open. Inside, resting on a bed of pure white satin, was my mother's vintage diamond necklace. My forensic legal team had successfully traced it and ripped it directly out of Beatrice's seized private vault. I ran my fingertips gently over the cool, glittering gems, feeling the profound weight of my family history finally restored and protected. I closed the box softly and turned my attention to the large, sleek silver monitor on my desk. I settled into my ergonomic leather chair. An encrypted notification chimed quietly. A new, highly confidential file appeared in my secure inbox. It was another massive, corrupt corporation with hidden ledgers, another group of arrogant executives operating under the delusion that they could hide their systemic theft in layered offshore accounts. I smiled a sharp, brilliant, incredibly confident grin. I was entirely independent, incredibly wealthy, and absolutely unstoppable. I placed my hands firmly on the keyboard and dived directly into my next forensic case. The takeaway from this revenge narrative is that true empowerment comes from quiet resilience and financial independence, not from seeking validation from toxic family members. When trapped in a cycle of favoritism and emotional abuse, the scapegoat often feels powerless. However, the journey proves that the best revenge is not explosive anger, but building a successful life in the shadows. By focusing on personal growth rather than familial approval, she reclaims her narrative. True strength lies in walking away from those who diminish you and standing firmly in your own worth. Please share your stories, comment below.